At the hardware store, I paid for a stranger's items. She gripped my arm and whispered, "Do not sweep the sawdust in your workshop after your daughter leaves." The next morning, my daughter's cold voice echoed from the hidden recorder. "The old man won't make it past this summer anyway. We're just accelerating the inevitable." Quietly, calmly, I sealed every piece of evidence. The counterattack begins. Thank you for being here with me. Before we begin, I'd like to ask, what's the weather like where you are right now? Leave a comment and let me know. I read each one, and your presence truly matters. A quick note, some details in this story have been shaped for reflection. What I hope reaches you is the heart of the message. The morning I opened the workshop door and saw what lay on the sawdust floor, my knees nearly gave out beneath me. I gripped the doorframe, the one I'd hung myself in the summer of 1982, and held on while my pulse hammered against my ribs. Dawn light was just starting to break over the Camden coast, that pale gray that comes before morning, and on my other hand, I held a UV inspection lamp I hadn't touched in 7 years. The kind of lamp that belongs in a lighthouse, not a woodshop. 43 years I'd been working wood in that barn. 43 years of Maine winters and coastal summers of sawdust and salt air, and the steady rhythm of hand tools against grain. I'd built furniture for half the families in Knox County. I'd carved lighthouse replicas that sold in the tourist shops down by the harbor. I knew every knot in those floorboards, every crack in the windows, every shadow that moved across the walls when the sun came through at different angles. But I had never felt cold like that before. My name is Howard Kendrick. I'm 75 years old, a man who spent 35 years keeping lights burning along the Maine and Nova Scotia coasts before my knees told me it was time to come home. Fresnel lens maintenance, that was my specialty. Those massive glass structures that can throw light 20 miles out to sea, each piece of glass cut and polished to bend light at exact angles. You learn to work with chemicals that reveal cracks invisible to the naked eye. You learn to read what ultraviolet light shows you that ordinary vision cannot see. 35 years of reading signals in the dark teaches you to tell the difference between real light and reflected light, between what's there and what you think is there. I retired in 2017 when my knees gave out, climbing the tower stairs at Portland Head. Came home to the 30 acres in Camden that my wife Lillian and I had bought back in 1981. 30 acres with a stand of black walnut trees my grandfather had planted in the 50s, back when he still owned this land. Trees that were finally mature enough to mill worth more money than I'd made in a lifetime of lighthouse work. The workshop sat behind our farmhouse, a barn I'd built with my own hands that first summer. Red sawdust covered the floor. Black walnut sawdust, the kind that stains everything it touches. The smell of it mixed with salt air from the ocean half a mile down the road. I'd hung that door in 1982, and it still swung true on its hinges. After Lillian died, that workshop became the only place I could breathe. She passed in June of 2022. 72 years old. We'd been married 48 years, long enough that I'd stopped thinking about what life would look like without her. The illness came fast, faster than the doctors expected, faster than either of us could prepare for. 1 month she was tending her garden, talking about putting in new rose bushes for the fall. The next month, she was gone. You need to understand something about working with black walnut. The sawdust gets into everything, your clothes, your skin. The cracks in the floorboards. It becomes part of the place, part of you. When you cut into a black walnut log, the smell that rises up is like nothing else in the world. Rich and dark and slightly bitter, like chocolate and earth, and something else I've never been able to name. After Lillian was gone, the only thing that kept me from sinking into that darkness was this workshop and the smell of black walnut sawdust. The wood doesn't ask questions. It doesn't need answers. It just needs steady hands and patience. I turned to carving small sculptures, lighthouse miniatures, mostly detailed replicas of the towers I'd maintained over 3 decades. I sold them at the farmer's market in town, gave some away to the families of keepers I'd worked with. The work kept my hands busy, and my mind occupied enough that I could sleep at night. But that morning in June, 2 years after Lillian died, I wasn't thinking about carving or selling or sleeping. I was thinking about the UV lamp in my hand and wondering why a woodworker would ever need such a thing. The lamp came from my lighthouse days. We used them to inspect Fresnel lenses for microscopic cracks to check maintenance chemicals for contamination you couldn't see under regular light. I'd kept it in a drawer in the workshop after I retired, buried under old sandpaper and broken chisels, never expecting to need it again. Until someone told me I would. Until someone explained that I should look at my own workshop floor when no one else was around early in the morning, before the sun came up, with nothing but ultraviolet light to show me what was really there. What does a man who spent 35 years reading light signals in fog and darkness do when someone tells him to look at his own workshop floor with ultraviolet light? When someone who has been watching, really watching, tells you that what you think you know about your own life is wrong. You listen. I stood in that doorway at dawn, the UV lamp heavy in my hand, and I remembered something Lillian used to say about the Fresnel lenses I maintained. She said they were designed to take a small flame and multiply it into something that could save lives 20 miles away. Take something fragile and make it powerful enough to guide ships through storms. Light is patient, she'd told me once. It waits until you're ready to see it. I reached inside and switched off the overhead bulbs. The workshop went dark except for the pale dawn coming through the windows. Then I turned on the UV lamp. The purple glow spread across the red sawdust floor, and I saw what someone had left for me to find. I had worked at that shop for 43 years. Never once needed UV light to understand what I was looking at. Until that morning in June, when the ultraviolet glow showed me something that had been there all along, invisible, waiting for the right kind of light to reveal it. But to understand how I got to that moment, you need to know about what happened 1 week before. About the phone call that changed everything. But to understand that morning with the UV lamp, you need to know what I stood to lose. My grandfather planted those black walnut trees the summer he came home from the war. 30 acres of coastal Maine property, half of it old-growth forest that he'd seeded by hand. He died before the trees were tall enough to mill, but he'd told me once that black walnut was the only wood worth planting because it remembered everything you put into it. By the time I retired, those trees were mature, valuable. The land appraiser from Portland had valued the property at $3.8 million. The timber rights alone were worth another $300,000. My wood sculpture collection, lighthouse replicas I'd carved over 40 years, had been appraised at $1.2 million. I still earned $180,000 a year consulting for coastal facilities on Fresnel lens maintenance work I could do from home. The estate was worth approximately $6.2 million. I didn't care about the numbers. I cared about the legacy. I cared about the smell of black walnut sawdust and the way the grain patterns told stories if you knew how to read them. Lillian understood that. She had worked as an archivist at the Portland Maritime Museum for 23 years before she retired. Preservation chemistry was her specialty, old navigation charts, lighthouse records, documents that needed to survive another century. She knew how to make things last. We were married for 48 years, long enough that I'd stopped thinking about what the world would look like without her in it. The illness came in March of 2022. By June, she was gone. After she died, the silence in that farmhouse was louder than any foghorn I had ever heard. I couldn't sleep in our bed for the first 3 months. I'd sit in the workshop until dawn, running my hands over wood grain and trying to remember how to breathe. Grief is not a straight line. It is a spiral that tightens and loosens without warning, and the only way through it is to keep your hands moving. The workshop became the only place where I could function. I'd carve lighthouse replicas from black walnut small enough to fit in your palm, detailed enough that you could see the individual panes in the Fresnel lens. I sold them at the farmer's market in Camden. The work kept my hands steady and my mind occupied enough that the nights didn't swallow me whole. I wasn't alone on the property, though. Griffin, my son, 40 years old, and a potter who had built his studio and home on the eastern edge of my 30 acres came by each morning with coffee and few words. He'd married Iris 12 years ago, back when Lillian was still healthy. Iris taught third grade at Camden Elementary, a woman with the kind of steady warmth that made a house feel like more than walls. They had a son, Jasper, 5 years old, with sawdust always in his hair, because he spent half his afternoons in my workshop, sitting on the little stool I'd made him watching me plane black walnut. "Why does the wood smell like chocolate, Grandpa? Can I make something?" Griffin worked in silence the way I did, shaping clay on his wheel, while I shaped wood at my bench. We didn't need to talk much. He'd bring coffee in the morning, check that I'd eaten something, then head back to his studio. But I knew he was watching, making sure I didn't disappear into the grief the way some men do. Iris brought dinner twice a week, casseroles and soups and her grandmother's bread recipe. She'd sit at my kitchen table and talk about her students, about Jasper, about the garden she was planning. She never asked if I was okay. She just showed up and filled the silence with ordinary life until it felt bearable again. There was one other person who watched. Russell Dalton, 70 years old, worked his forge at the forest edge with his dog, Cinder. I'd known Russell since our lighthouse days. We'd both worked isolated stations up and down the Maine coast, both learned to speak in Morse code and comfortable silence. He'd retired the same year I did, bought 5 acres adjacent to my property, and set up a blacksmith forge where he made custom ironwork for historic homes. Russell spoke perhaps 10 words a week, but he had never once looked away when I needed someone watching. His forge hammer rang out across the property at odd hours, a rhythm I'd learned to read. 3 strikes meant he was working. Long pause, then 2 strikes meant he'd seen something. 1 strike meant come look. Cinder, his border collie, lay at the forge entrance and watched the tree line with the same patient vigilance as his owner. Between Griffin and Russell, I was never truly alone on those 30 acres. Even in the worst of the grief, I knew there were people watching, which is why the phone call felt wrong from the first word. It came on a Thursday afternoon in late May. I was in the workshop when I heard the phone ringing in the kitchen. Something made me set down the chisel and walk inside. "Dad," Denise, my daughter, 45 years old and a divorce lawyer in Portland, with a cement gray Porsche Taycan and a voice smooth as legal documents. The last time I'd heard that voice was at Lillian's funeral 18 months ago. She'd stayed 2 hours, shaken hands with the appropriate people, and then driven back to Portland without staying for the reception. "I'm coming to visit this weekend," she said. "Saturday afternoon, just for a few hours." 35 years of reading signal lights in the fog teaches you one thing: the difference between real light and reflected light, between a warning and a welcome, between warmth and the performance of warmth. Denise's voice had always been a performance. "I'm bringing a friend," she added. "Someone I want you to meet." I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the black walnut forest. In 45 years, Denise had never once brought a friend to see me. Not to birthday dinners, not on holidays, not even to her mother's funeral. "All right," I said. After I hung up, I stood there for a long time, watching the shadows move through the trees, and I felt the first cold thread of something I could not name. I did not know then that while I stood at that kitchen window, feeling that cold thread of unease, someone else was already watching my property from the black walnut forest. Someone who had been watching for longer than I could have imagined. Vera told me later what she had done that Saturday morning, and I am going to tell you now exactly as she told it to me. Vera Sutton, 70 years old. My sister estranged for 40 years over a land inheritance dispute I barely remembered, but she had never forgotten. She married in 1980, became Sutton, moved to Rockland, 20 miles down the coast. We'd stopped speaking in 1984, after our parents died, and the will divided their property in ways neither of us thought were fair. She had watched me from a distance for 20 years, she said. Not obsessively, just carefully. The way someone watches a lighthouse from shore, checking that the light still burns. I had been watching your family from a distance for 20 years, Howard, she told me later. I thought if I could not be your sister, I could at least be a guardian you did not know you had. She'd lost her own son to greed in 1984. He'd stolen her savings and disappeared. Childless after that, she'd carried the guilt of missing the signs of not seeing what he'd become until it was too late. She spent the next 40 years looking for those signs in other people. That Saturday morning in late May, while I stood at my kitchen window worrying about Denise's phone call, Vera was in downtown Portland, near the legal district, where my daughter kept her office. She'd followed that cement gray Porsche Taycan 3 times over the past 6 months, learning its routes, learning its patterns. I knew its shape the way a sailor knows a particular sail. She watched it leave the parking garage at 9 in the morning. Denise behind the wheel. A man in the passenger seat Vera didn't recognize. Vera followed. She kept 3 cars back on Route 1 heading north toward Camden. Her old beige Chevrolet was invisible among the weekend traffic. The Porsche didn't wander. It moved with purpose. She was going somewhere she had been before. When the Porsche turned onto the Camden back roads, Vera knew exactly where it was headed. She'd driven those roads herself dozens of times, parking on logging trails, walking through the forest, to watch my property from the tree line. She parked her Chevrolet on a logging road half a mile from my property and approached through the forest on foot. You need to understand, when you lose someone to their own greed, you spend the rest of your life looking for the signs you missed. Vera had been looking for 40 years. From the tree line, she watched the Porsche park near my workshop barn. A man stepped out. Maybe 40 years old, wearing expensive leather shoes, completely wrong for a rural Maine property. Nervous energy. Scanning eyes. The kind of man who looked at a workshop and saw angles instead of craftsmanship. Pierce Townsend, though Vera didn't know his name then. Denise stayed in the car. The man circled the workshop alone. Vera had spent 40 years working with her hands. Wood restoration was her trade. Old furniture, antique doors, pieces that needed to be brought back from ruin. She knew how to read grain patterns, how to see what wood remembered. And she knew how to read spaces the way craftspeople do. I had spent 40 years restoring old things, she told me. I knew what a man looked like when he was measuring a space for creation. This man was not creating, he was calculating. He peered into the workshop windows, checked sight lines from the door, walked the perimeter looking for blind spots, stepped inside. I'd left it unlocked, and examined the space with the kind of attention that had nothing to do with appreciation. He looked under my workbench, behind the stacked lumber, at the old life preserver hanging on the wall, a relic from my lighthouse days. He took photographs with his phone. He looked at that workshop the way a thief looks at a vault, Vera said, measuring what could be hidden and where. After 15 minutes, the man returned to the Porsche. They talked briefly, then drove away. Vera stayed in the forest. She sat on a fallen log and thought about what she'd seen. The workshop was the perfect crime scene. Sawdust that would hide footprints, multiple hiding places, isolated location. An elderly man living alone, still grieving his wife. They were going to plant something, frame me for something, create a reason to seize the property. She'd seen it before. Her own son had done something similar, convinced a business partner to sign over assets, then manufactured evidence of fraud. They were going to turn your most sacred place into a crime scene, she told me. Your workshop, your sanctuary after Lillian's death. I had failed to save my own son from becoming a thief. I would not fail to save my brothers from becoming a victim. But 40 years of silence is a wall you cannot climb with a phone call. She couldn't just appear at my door with warnings about my daughter. I wouldn't trust her. I'd think she was the threat. She needed a credible approach. She needed me to see her first as a stranger worth helping. She drove back to Rockland that afternoon and sat at her kitchen table with tea and 40 years of regret, and one clear thought. She knew I visited Camden Hardware and Marine Supply every Monday morning around 10 o'clock. She'd watched me do it a dozen times over the past 6 months. She had one day to prepare, one day to find a reason to be in that store counting out change for something she needed short, exactly the right amount to require a stranger's kindness. Monday morning, I drove into Camden with the windows down and the radio playing, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something close to happiness. Jasper would be 5 years old next month. Old enough for a real treasure box of his own, something made with brass hinges and black walnut, that would last long enough for him to pass down to his own grandchildren someday. I'd been planning it for weeks, small enough to fit on a child's shelf, large enough to hold the important things a boy collects. Rocks from the beach, feathers. The kinds of treasures that don't make sense to anyone but the person who found them. For the first time since Lillian died, I was thinking about a project that would bring me joy instead of just keeping my hands busy. Camden Hardware and Marine Supply sat on Route 1 just north of the harbor, a building that had been there longer than I'd been alive. The place smelled like every coastal Maine morning I had ever known: paint and rope and marine varnish, sawdust and salt air and possibility. I needed small brass hinges, wood oil, and fine sandpaper. Simple supplies for a simple project that felt like the first step back toward something that looked like living. The woman ahead of me in line was maybe 70, wearing a light blue floral dress and a straw hat with a silk ribbon tied under her chin, the old way, the way my mother used to wear hers before she died. She reminded me of that generation, the ones who grew up during the Depression and never quite forgot what it meant to count every dollar. She was buying professional brushes, real horsehair, the kind craftsmen use for restoration work, not the kind you buy for a weekend project. Expensive brushes. 3 of them plus a small tin of specialized wood conditioner and a package of fine steel wool. Tommy Bradshaw, the young fellow behind the register, who had worked at Camden Hardware since high school, waited patiently while she counted out coins on the counter. Quarters, dimes, nickels, a few pennies. She counted 3 times. Her hands were shaking, but her counting was precise, methodical. The kind of precision that comes from years of working with your hands, knowing that measurements matter. Tommy totaled the purchase and waited. The woman looked up at him with quiet dignity. "I am $10 short," she said. Her voice was soft with an accent I couldn't quite place. Could have been Canadian Maritime. Could have been Old Maine. "I can leave the steel wool. I will come back for it next week. You need to understand something about lighthouse keepers and their families. We learned young that the light you keep for strangers matters more than the comfort you keep for yourself. It becomes instinct. You don't think about it. You just do it." I stepped forward and set my items on the counter beside hers. "I'll get hers too, son," I said to Tommy. "Ring it all together." The woman turned to look at me. Her look wasn't gratitude. It was study, assessment, confirmation of something she'd been waiting to see. "You are a kind man," she said. "What is your name?" "Howard," I said. "Howard Kendrick. I live out on Shore Road near the Black Walnut property." "Kendrick." She repeated it slowly, as though the name meant something to her. "I knew a Kendrick once," she said. "A long time ago. I paid for both purchases, hers and mine, and Tommy bagged them separately." The woman gathered her bag and thanked me quietly, then walked toward the door. I followed a few steps behind, carrying my own supplies. In the parking lot, she stopped beside my truck. I'd parked near the entrance like I always did, close enough that I wouldn't have to carry heavy supplies too far if I bought paint or lumber. She reached out and took hold of my forearm. Her grip was stronger than it had any right to be. Hands that had trembled counting coins held my forearm like iron. "Thank you, Howard Kendrick," she said. "You have done more than you know." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. Those eyes, pale gray, almost silver in the morning light. There are moments in life when you meet someone and know the way you know a storm is building, when the barometer drops, that this person will change everything. I did not know how. I only knew the pressure was shifting. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" "No," she said. "I have my car, but I wanted to thank you properly. Not many people would do what you just did." "It was $10, I said. "It was more than that." She released my arm and stepped back, adjusted the ribbon on her hat, picked up her bag from the ground where she'd set it. "You take care of yourself, Howard Kendrick," she said, "and keep your eyes open. Sometimes the people who smile the widest are the ones watching closest." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and walked toward an old beige Chevrolet parked at the far end of the lot. I watched her go, feeling like I'd just had a conversation in a language I almost understood, but couldn't quite translate. I stood there holding my bag of supplies, the brass hinges and sandpaper and wood oil for Jasper's treasure box, and thought about her eyes. Pale gray like Fresnel lens, light on a night with no moon, when the light moves through the glass and becomes something else entirely. Not quite reflection, not quite source. Something in between that you can't name but you recognize when you see it. I had seen that color before. I had seen eyes that exact color before, but I could not remember where. The Chevrolet pulled out of the parking lot and headed north on Route 1 back toward Rockland. I stood there watching it disappear, and I felt the strangest sensation crawling up my spine, like someone had walked over my grave. Like I had just met someone who knew things about me that I didn't know about myself. I got in my truck and drove home, and I did not think about the old woman in the blue dress again until Thursday afternoon, when my daughter's cement gray Porsche pulled into my driveway with a stranger in the passenger seat. She didn't walk straight to her car. She turned to me in that parking lot, and her voice when she spoke again was different, lower, urgent. "Howard," she said, "I need to tell you something. Can we speak by your truck, away from the door?" The trembling in her hands was gone. Her grip when she'd taken my forearm had been steady as iron, and now her voice carried the same certainty. This was not the voice of a confused old woman counting coins. This was something else. 35 years of reading weather and people's intentions in the fog taught me to recognize when someone was about to deliver a warning. I nodded and led her toward my truck, parked 20 feet from the entrance, far enough that the people going in and out of the hardware store wouldn't overhear. "I watched a man walk around your workshop Saturday afternoon," she said. "He was not looking at it the way a craftsman looks at a workshop." I felt the morning air go cold despite the sun. "What do you mean you watched?" "I have worked 40 years restoring old furniture," she said. "Reading workshop spaces, wood grain, the way light falls through windows. I know what a man looks like when he is measuring a space for creation. I know what it looks like when someone is measuring a space for something else entirely." She looked up at me with those pale gray eyes. "This man was not admiring your work, Howard Kendrick. He was calculating." "Who was this man?" "I do not know his name, but I can tell you exactly what he did." She described it with the precision of someone who had spent decades working with measurements and angles. He stood by the north corner where I kept the old life preserver hanging on the wall, a relic from my first lighthouse station that I'd never had the heart to throw away. He looked behind the lumber stack in the far corner, the gap where I kept offcuts and pieces I wasn't ready to use yet. He was measuring angles, she said. Which spots could not be seen from the front door? Which corners the windows did not cover? Where shadows pooled in the late afternoon when the sun came through at low angles. Listen to me carefully. When someone tells you they watched a stranger measure your most private space for hiding places, you have two choices: dismiss them as crazy, or listen like your life depends on it. I chose to listen. He wore expensive leather shoes, she said. Wrong shoes for walking a rural workshop floor. And he took photographs with his phone. Not of your sculptures, not of your tools, of the corners, the spaces behind things. Why are you telling me this? Because that man was not looking at your space the way a man looks at a place he wants to work, she said. He was looking at it the way a man looks at a place he wants to hide something. The hardware store parking lot was busy with Monday morning traffic. Trucks coming and going, people loading lumber and paint cans. The ordinary rhythm of a coastal Maine town going about its business. But standing there beside my truck with this woman I'd just met, I felt like I'd stepped into a different world entirely. "I don't understand," I said. "How do you know about my workshop? How did you see this man?" "That does not matter right now," she said. "What matters is what you do next." She reached into the pocket of her blue floral dress and pulled out a small glass vial, about the size of my thumb, filled with powder the color of a summer sunset purple and brilliant pink. "When they come back," she said, "sprinkle this over the sawdust on your workshop floor. Not everywhere, just the corners, the pathways, the places where someone would walk if they did not want to be seen from the door or windows." "What is it?" "Marine fluorescent powder. It marks what touches it, but you cannot see it with regular light." I looked at the vial in her hand. I'd seen powder like that in lighthouse supply catalogs. We used it on ship decks to trace leaks, to mark pathways in darkness that needed to stay visible in emergencies. "After you sprinkle it, cover it with a fresh layer of sawdust," she said. "Do not disturb it. Do not sweep. Just let it sit beneath the surface." "And then what?" "Then you wait. When they come, and they will come back, the powder will transfer to their shoes, their hands. Anything that touches it, they will not see it. They will not know." She pressed the vial into my palm. "After they leave, do not use your overhead bulbs to look. Only ultraviolet light will show you what they did, where they walked, what they touched, what they hid. There is a specific kind of cold that runs through you when you realize someone has been watching you not for days, but for months. Not from curiosity, but from purpose. Use the UV lamp," she said. "The one you used on the lighthouse lenses. You still have it." I went still. I had not told her about my lighthouse career. I'd given her my name and my road, nothing more. The UV lamp sat in a drawer in my workshop, buried under old sandpaper and broken chisels. I hadn't touched it in 7 years, not since I retired from the service. "How do you know about my lamp?" I asked. Her grip on my forearm tightened. Those hands that had trembled counting coins were steady now, holding me in place with surprising strength. "I know more than you think, Howard Kendrick," she said. "I know what you stand to lose. I know who is coming for it. And I know you will need to see the truth before you can believe it." "Who are you?" She released my arm and stepped back, adjusted the ribbon on her straw hat, picked up her bag from the ground. "Someone who has been watching longer than they have," she said. She turned and walked toward the old beige Chevrolet at the far end of the lot. I stood there holding the vial of purple powder, watching her go, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She knew about my UV lamp. I had not told her that. She had been watching long enough to know what tools I kept, what work I'd done, what I could do with equipment most people didn't understand. This was not guessing. This was not coincidence. This was something else entirely. I drove home from that hardware store parking lot with a vial of purple powder in my pocket and questions I could not answer. But I did not know then that while Vera was tracking my daughter from Portland to Camden, my son Griffin was running his own surveillance operation in my workshop and had been for 3 weeks. Griffin told me later what he had done. That was my son. He never spoke until he was certain. He worked in clay and silence, shaping truth, the way he shaped bowls on his wheel, waiting until the form was complete before showing anyone what he had made. While I was grieving, Lillian and Vera was watching from Rockland. Griffin was preparing for something I did not yet know to fear. He had been suspecting Denise for months, and he had been waiting for proof. Mid-May, 3 weeks before the hardware store, Griffin worked alone in my workshop late at night while I slept in the farmhouse. He had always had a key since he built his pottery studio on the property 12 years ago. There was an unfinished black walnut plank on my workbench, a piece I was planning to use for a table, still rough, still showing the natural character of the wood. It had a knot the size of a quarter right in the center, one of those dark whorls where a branch had grown out decades ago and the tree had sealed it over with new growth. Griffin drilled a microscopic hole through the center of that knot with a jeweler's bit, the kind you use for precision work on small pieces. Then he took a miniature camera lens salvaged from an old security system he'd dismantled years ago and inserted it into the hole. From 3 feet away, you could not tell it was anything but a natural flaw in the wood grain. The knot was natural. The camera made it functional. He positioned the plank against the east wall of the workshop, angled so the lens covered the entire floor, especially the north corner where I kept the old life preserver hanging from a nail. The corner that had blind spots from both the door and the windows. I needed to see what happened when Dad was not looking, he told me later, and I needed him not to know I was watching. That same night, Griffin crawled beneath the workshop floor through the access hatch I'd built when I first constructed the barn. The space was tight, barely 2 feet of clearance between the dirt and the joists, but Griffin was patient. He always had been. He installed a vibration sensor he'd constructed himself from ceramic speaker components. Parts salvaged from a broken pottery kiln repurposed into something that could detect the smallest movements through the floor above. Ceramics are sensitive to vibration. Griffin knew how they transmit sound, how they pick up frequencies that other materials miss. He mounted the sensor directly under the central floor joists and ran a wireless feed to a recorder hidden in the workshop rafters. There is a particular kind of vigilance that runs in families who have spent generations keeping lights burning in the dark. Griffin had it. I had it. We both knew how to watch, how to wait, how to prepare for danger we hoped would never come. She came to Mom's funeral and spent 20 minutes in this workshop alone, Griffin told me. That was not grief. That was assessment. He had watched the camera feed on his phone every night for 3 weeks. Waiting. Knowing she would come back. Wednesday afternoon, 2 days after the hardware store, I was working in the garden when I heard tires on gravel. The cement gray Porsche Taycan pulled into my driveway at 3 o'clock. Denise stepped out first. She looked exactly like what she was, a successful Portland lawyer in casual clothes that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Polished. Professional. The kind of smile that belonged in courtrooms and closing arguments. The passenger door opened and a man stepped out, 40-ish. Expensive leather shoes, completely wrong for a rural Maine property. Nervous energy in the way he moved, scanning eyes that assessed rather than appreciated. "Dad," Denise said, walking toward me with that practiced warmth that had always felt like performance. "This is Pierce Townsend. He works with an architectural studio in Portland. They are interested in sourcing some of your black walnut for a custom project." Pierce extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was weak, distracted. "Beautiful property," he said, but he was not looking at the property. He was looking at the workshop barn. "We will just walk the forest, look at the mature trees," Denise said. "Won't take more than an hour." I remembered Vera's words in the parking lot. "When they come back, and they will come back." I said yes. I said of course. I said help yourself. They walked toward the black walnut forest that my grandfather had planted 70 years ago, and I watched them go. Denise talked about timber quality and grain patterns and custom furniture projects. Her voice carried on the afternoon air, confident and familiar. But Pierce was not listening to her. His eyes kept returning to the workshop. "You need to understand when two people independently tell you the same threat is real, one who has been watching from the forest. One who has been watching from inside your own walls, you stop questioning whether it is coming. You start preparing for when." I had spent 35 years reading what people looked at versus what they said they were looking at. Light signals in fog. The difference between a vessel in distress and a vessel on course. The gap between words and truth. Pierce said he was looking at trees, but his eyes kept going to the workshop. He was measuring angles. Which spots could be seen from where I stood? Which corners were hidden from which doors? Where the shadows fell when the sun came through the windows at different times of day. And then his gaze settled on something specific. The north corner of the workshop, visible from where we stood in the driveway. The corner where the old life preserver hung on a nail. The corner that had a blind spot from the front door, the corner that could not be seen from the main windows. The exact corner Vera had described in that parking lot 2 days ago. He had been here before. He had measured this when I was not watching. He knew which spaces were hidden and which were exposed, and Vera had been watching for both of us. The purple powder vial sat in my pocket, and I understood with cold certainty that I was going to need it. They finished surveying the black walnut forest just as the sun was starting to lower, and I offered them coffee not out of hospitality, but because I wanted to watch what they would do inside my house. "Come in for coffee," I said. "It is the least I can do after you drove all the way from Portland." Denise smiled. That professional warmth she'd perfected over 20 years of divorce law. "That would be lovely, Dad." They followed me into the farmhouse kitchen. The room where Lillian and I had eaten breakfast together for 48 years, where Jasper sat on the counter and asked questions while I made pancakes, where Griffin brought his coffee every morning, and we sat in comfortable silence. Denise made small talk about timber quality and Portland architecture markets. Her voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of conversation that filled space without saying anything real. But Pierce was quiet. His eyes moved across my kitchen, my hallway, my doors. He was mapping the house the way he had mapped the workshop, measuring what could be seen from where, which rooms connected to which, where the private spaces were. I poured coffee from the pot I'd made that morning. Denise took the cup, then set it down. "Actually, Dad, could I just have water? Coffee keeps me up." She moved to the sink herself, filling a glass, her back to me, giving Pierce an opening. "Could I use your restroom?" Pierce asked. I pointed down the hall past the file room where I kept estate documents toward the bathroom at the end, but Pierce hesitated at the back door. "Actually, I will step outside for some air first," he said. "Long day. Is that the back door?" "Yes," I said, and I watched him walk toward my workshop. Denise turned from the sink, glass of water in hand, and started asking questions. "Have you had the property appraised recently, Dad, for estate planning purposes?" "A few years ago." "And Mom's, will everything is in order? Everything is settled? Where do you keep those documents? Just in case something happens, I should know where to find them." "There is a particular kind of fury that comes from watching someone you raised, someone you loved, coordinate your destruction with the precision of a legal contract. It burns cold, not hot. It sharpens rather than clouds." I answered her questions, but I was watching through the kitchen window. Pierce crossed the yard to my workshop, carrying a small dark bag I had not seen him holding 5 minutes before. He must have retrieved it from the Porsche while we walked the forest. Hidden it. Waited for the right moment. He entered the workshop through the side door. I looked at the kitchen clock. 5:38. Denise kept talking. "The timber market is really strong right now. Pierce's studio has connections with high-end furniture makers. They could offer you a very fair price for selective harvesting. I am not interested in selling. Of course not. I am just saying, if you ever wanted to generate income from the property without selling it outright." 5:42. 4 minutes. Pierce emerged from the workshop, the bag no longer visible. He walked back across the yard with his hands in his pockets, looking relaxed. Casual. Like a man who had just stepped outside for air. He came back into the kitchen. "Beautiful evening," he said. Denise smiled at him. A look passed between them that I was not supposed to see. "May I use your restroom, Dad?" I pointed down the hall again. Bathroom at the end, past the file room. She walked down the hall. I heard her footsteps on the old wooden floor. I heard her pass the bathroom door. I heard the file room door open. Not all the way, just enough. Pierce stood in my kitchen making awkward small talk about pottery, asking about Griffin's studio, filling the silence with words that meant nothing. I listened to the file room. Metal on metal. The filing cabinet drawer sliding open. 5:43 by the kitchen clock. 5:49 when she came back out. 6 minutes. "We should get going, Dad," Denise said. "Long drive back to Portland. Thank you for the coffee." I walked them to the door, watched the gray Porsche pull out of the driveway and disappear down Shore Road toward Route 1. Then I went to the workshop. The purple powder vial was in my hand before I reached the door. I grabbed a flashlight from the shelf just inside the entrance and walked to the north corner. The sawdust had been disturbed exactly where Vera said. Exactly where Pierce's eyes had gone that afternoon when he thought I was not watching. The north corner near the old life preserver hanging on the wall. The corner that had blind spots from both the front door and the windows. Fresh scuff marks in the red sawdust leading from the side door to the corner, then back again. Someone had walked there recently. Someone had been on their knees in that corner. I unscrewed the cap on the purple powder vial. The powder caught the last light coming through the west window, brilliant purple and pink like a sunset compressed into dust. 43 years of working with black walnut taught me that the wood itself remembers every touch, every tool, every intention. The sawdust was going to remember what Pierce had done. The purple powder would make sure of it. I sprinkled the powder over every inch of the disturbed area, over the scuff marks, over the pathways, over the corner where someone had knelt and hidden something in my most sacred space. Then I took my collection bucket, the one where I kept fresh sawdust for starting fires in winter, and I poured a thin layer over everything, covered the purple powder completely, smoothed it with my hand until it looked natural, undisturbed, like it had sat there for weeks. Every instinct I had wanted to check my work, to see if the powder had done what Vera promised, to understand what I was dealing with. But I remembered her words in that parking lot. Only ultraviolet light will show you what they did. Only the UV lamp. I capped the empty vial and put it in my pocket. I turned off the flashlight. I walked out of the workshop and locked the door behind me. Pierce had gone exactly where Vera said he would go, the north corner, the life preserver, the blind spot from the front door. She had read him from the tree line, with 40 years of craftsman's eyes, measuring his intentions the way she had measured wood grain and workshop spaces her entire life. She had not missed a single detail, and now neither would I. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark listening to the house settle and the ocean breathe, and at 2 a.m. I heard the hammering start from Russell's forge. Not random work rhythm, specific pattern. 3 strikes, pause, 1 strike, pause, 3 strikes. I knew that rhythm. Russell and I had used it on night watches 40 years ago. Morse code from the lighthouse days. Distress signal. Stranger present. Watch out. Russell never worked his forge at 2 a.m, unless he was telling me something. I got out of bed and went to the window overlooking the property. The workshop was dark except for a small beam of light moving inside someone with a flashlight, trying not to be seen. Then a bright red beam pierced through the workshop window from the direction of Russell's forge. Converging lens and welding torch. We used to signal ships that way when the regular lighthouse beam wasn't enough. You could focus a welding torch through a lens and project a tight beam hundreds of feet. Russell had kept his equipment from the old days, same as I had. The red beam cut through the workshop darkness and hit the pendulum clock on the north wall. The clock started chiming. Not the hour, just chiming, triggered by the light hitting a mechanism Russell had rigged into it years ago as a workshop alarm, something I'd forgotten about until that moment. Russell was marking them, time-stamping their presence, making sure I saw. I stood at my bedroom window and counted. 45 seconds from the first chime, 2 silhouettes visible when the flashlight swept across the workshop interior. I recognized Denise's height, Pierce's build. They were in the north corner, exactly where I had sprinkled the purple powder 6 hours earlier. There is a particular kind of vigilance that runs in men who have kept lights burning in darkness for decades. We do not panic when the night brings danger. We mark it. We measure it. We prepare the evidence. Denise's shadow crossed the red beam. 2 seconds of complete blockage. Her height, her build, unmistakable. The timestamp was locked. 45 seconds. Her shadow interrupting Russell's beam. Proof she had been there. Proof of when and where she stood. Russell kept the beam steady, tracking their movements through the workshop like he used to track vessels in fog. What I did not know then, what Griffin told me later, was that he was watching too. Griffin sat in his pottery studio a quarter-mile away, phone in hand, watching the feed from the wooden eye camera hidden in the black walnut plank. The camera captured everything in infrared. Denise and Pierce clearly visible. Pierce kneeling at the north corner near the old life preserver. Denise standing guard at the door. And beneath the floor, the vibration sensor Griffin had built from ceramic speaker components was recording their whispers. He played it for me later, the audio digitally filtered for clarity. Denise's voice came through cold and clear. "Just get it in there. The old man won't make it past this summer anyway." Pierce's response was muffled. Then Denise again. "By Christmas, this will all be ours. You need to understand, when you hear your own daughter speak the words that mean she plans to kill you before Christmas, your mind does two things at once. It shatters, and it sharpens. Mine did both. But standing at that window at 2 in the morning, I did not know about the audio yet. I only knew what I could see. Pierce was hiding something in the north corner. Something small enough to fit behind the lumber stack or under the floor gap. Something they needed to check on to make sure it was perfectly concealed. Denise moved to the door watching, keeping guard while Pierce worked. The flashlight beam went dark. Russell's red beam cut off. Silence. I stood at the window in darkness and counted seconds. Waited to see if they would come toward the house. If they would do something else I needed to see. 2 minutes later, I saw them exit the workshop side door and move quickly toward the edge of the property. They disappeared into the trees, heading toward the logging road, where they must have parked the Porsche out of sight. Russell's forge hammer tapped twice. All clear. They were gone. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. My hands were shaking. I wanted to run to the workshop right then to see what they had hidden, to understand what I was dealing with. But Vera had said wait until morning. Only the UV lamp. Only in daylight when you can see everything clearly. So I waited. I sat in the dark and listened to my daughter plan my death, and I did not make a sound. The timestamp was locked. 45 seconds. Her shadow across Russell's red beam. Every word captured by Griffin's sensor beneath the floor. Every movement recorded by the wooden eye camera hidden in plain sight. By Christmas, she had said, this will all be ours. 6 months. That was the timeline she had given herself. 6 months to make me disappear and claim the property that my grandfather had planted with his own hands 70 years ago. I thought about Lillian. About how she had known something was wrong, about how she had spent her last months preparing something I did not understand yet, about preservation chemistry and invisible ink and the ways she had tried to protect me even as she was dying. I thought about Vera watching from the forest, tracking my daughter's movements, measuring Pierce's intentions with 40 years of craftsman's eyes. I thought about Griffin installing cameras in the dark while I slept, building evidence systems from pottery kiln parts because he suspected his sister before I did. I thought about Russell sending Morse code signals through the night, keeping watch from his forge, the way he used to keep watch from lighthouse towers. I had thought I was alone after Lillian died, but I had been surrounded by people preparing to save my life, and I had not known it. 4 hours until dawn. 4 hours until I could turn on the UV lamp and see what they had hidden in the north corner of my workshop. 4 hours until the purple powder revealed what Denise and Pierce thought would stay invisible forever. I lay back down in the dark and waited for the sun. The sun came up pink over the Atlantic at 5:43, and I walked to my workshop carrying the UV lamp I had not used in 7 years. I had not slept. I had sat in the dark counting minutes until dawn, playing Denise's voice over and over in my mind. The old man won't make it past this summer anyway. By Christmas, this will all be ours. 6 months. That was my daughter's timeline for my death. The UV lamp was heavy in my hand. Solid metal housing, industrial-grade ultraviolet bulb inside. I had used it on Fresnel lenses for 3 decades, checking for microscopic cracks invisible to the naked eye, inspecting maintenance chemicals for contamination, reading what normal light could not reveal. Vera had said only the UV lamp, only when you are alone, Only when you are ready to see the truth. I was ready. The workshop looked peaceful in the dawn light. The fresh sawdust I had spread over the purple powder last evening was smooth and undisturbed. The old life preserver hung on the north wall exactly where it always did. Everything looked normal. I closed the workshop door behind me, locked it, pulled the heavy canvas curtains over the windows, the ones I used in winter to keep the heat in. The workshop went dark, except for thin lines of dawn light around the curtain edges. I turned off the overhead fluorescent bulbs. Complete darkness. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. 35 years of lighthouse work taught you to trust darkness, to wait for your vision to adapt before making decisions. Then I switched on the UV lamp. The buzzing hum filled the space. Purple-blue glow spread across the workshop, like phosphorescence in deep water. Everything looked different under ultraviolet light. The wood grain showed patterns I had never noticed. Dust particles hung visible in the air. The red-black walnut sawdust turned dark charcoal gray, and then I saw them. The footprints, glowing purple like fire against the dark floor. Ultraviolet light shows what visible light cannot. The invisible made visible the hidden, brought to surface like bringing a lighthouse beam to bear on fog and seeing the shapes that were always there. The trail started at the side door where Pierce had entered last night. 15 steps across my workshop floor in a straight line toward the north corner. Each footprint distinct, brilliant purple fluorescence marking every place the marine powder had transferred to his expensive leather shoes. I could see his tread pattern. Distinctive diamond crosshatch design. Right foot slightly heavier than left, he favored one leg, shifted his weight as he walked. I could measure his stride, 28 inches, consistent, purposeful. Halfway across the shop, the footprints changed. Smaller steps, shuffling. He had stopped there, turned toward the house, checking to make sure I was not watching from the kitchen window. The powder had captured his hesitation, his careful surveillance, his guilt. Then the stride lengthened again. Purposeful, direct. Straight to the north corner, exactly where Vera had said. The trail stopped beside the old cork life preserver hanging on the wall. The blind spot from the front door. The corner that could not be seen from the workshop windows when someone stood at the entrance. Vera had watched Pierce from the tree line for maybe 10 minutes on Saturday afternoon. And she had predicted this perfectly. Under the UV lamp, I could see everything he had done. Knee prints glowed purple where he had knelt. Both knees. Right knee deeper, he had shifted his weight onto it while he worked, hiding whatever he had brought in that small, dark bag. Handprints on the floor where he had braced himself, and a purple smear on the life preserver casing, where his hand had brushed it, moving it aside to access the wall gap behind. You need to understand what it means when a 70-year-old craftswoman watches a 40-year-old criminal from a tree line for 10 minutes and predicts his exact movements 3 days later. That is not luck. That is 40 years of reading intention in wood grain and human behavior. That is a lifetime of understanding how people move through spaces when they think no one is watching. Vera had not missed a single detail. I moved closer to the north corner, careful not to step on the glowing footprints, not to disturb any of the sawdust that held this perfect record of Pierce's intrusion. Under the UV lamp, I noticed something else. A cluster of black walnut sawdust clumped together near where his right knee had pressed down. The sawdust was adhered wet adhesion, not dry. I knelt beside it, careful not to touch. Dark stain visible even under the purple light. Blood. A wood splinter was still embedded in the sawdust pile, sharp sliver of black walnut that had pierced Pierce's hand while he knelt there. He had wiped the blood on the sawdust instinctively, not thinking about what he was leaving behind. Black walnut contains Taxol, the same compound they use in cancer treatment. Powerful antibacterial natural preservative. The wood preserves everything it touches. That is why furniture makers love it, why it lasts centuries without rotting. Pierce's blood was perfectly preserved in that sawdust. No degradation, DNA intact. He had documented himself at the exact location he had hidden evidence to frame me. I stood up and looked at the complete picture under the UV lamp's purple glow. 15 glowing footprints from door to corner. Hesitation marks where he checked for witnesses. Knee prints showing which knee bore his weight. Handprints on floor and life preserver. Blood and DNA in the sawdust. A complete forensic map of criminal intrusion. Every law enforcement agency in the country used UV powder for exactly this reason. It marked what touched it. It transferred invisibly. It revealed the truth under the right kind of light. Vera had given me a $10 bottle of marine fluorescent powder, and it had documented everything. The purple light stopped right where Vera had told me it would. North corner life preserver blind spot, kneeling position. She had read him from the tree line, with 40 years of craftsman's eyes measuring his intentions the way she measured wood grain and workshop spaces her entire life. She had not missed a single detail, not one. Now I needed to see what he had hidden there. And I needed to see it without touching it, without disturbing a single grain of that evidence-laden sawdust. I photographed everything in the workshop under UV light, the glowing purple footprints, the knee prints, the blood in the sawdust, then carried the lamp into the house. Because if Denise had planted evidence in one place, she had contaminated others. The file room first. I stood in the doorway with the UV lamp buzzing in my hand, purple glow filling the small space where I kept estate documents and Lillian's Maritime Museum archives. The filing cabinet drawer Denise had opened for 6 minutes yesterday. I slid it open now. Estate documents folder on top. Newer than the others, recently placed. I removed the will and held it under the UV lamp. The paper glowed pure white. No chemical signature, no watermark, nothing. Lillian had worked as an archivist for 23 years. She knew how to mark documents that mattered. She had told me once about preservation chemicals that fluoresced under ultraviolet light. Invisible watermarks that only someone who knew what they were looking for would find. This will had none of that. This was not her will. This was Denise's forgery. I set it aside and searched the filing cabinet for the original. Gone. Removed. Probably destroyed. But then I remembered. Lillian had told me about the secret drawer years ago, behind the oak bookshelf. Just in case someone ever tries to take what is not theirs, Howard. I moved the bookshelf aside. The shallow drawer built into the wall was exactly where she had said it would be. Inside the original will. Lillian's handwriting. Dated 2019. Witnessed by Philip Garrison. I held it under the UV lamp. The paper glowed faint blue-green. Her chemical watermark. Proof of authenticity. The signature treatment only a maritime archivist would know to apply. But there was something else. Faint purple text appearing on what had been blank margins in normal light. Invisible ink. Writing that only showed under ultraviolet illumination. I adjusted the lamp angle and read Lillian's words. Additional clause dated 6 months before her death. If any child or heir attempts by any means legal, fraudulent, or coercive to seize control of estate assets before testator's natural death, said attempt shall trigger automatic forfeiture of all inheritance rights. Entire estate shall transfer to designated charitable trust and / or Vera Sutton. Witnessed by Philip Garrison. Notation beneath his signature, UV verification required. When your wife writes a legal clause in invisible ink 6 months before she dies, specifically designed to catch the child she knows will try to kill you after she is gone, that is not paranoia. That is love operating at a level most people cannot comprehend. Denise had activated her own punishment. By swapping the will, by planting the forged document in the filing cabinet, she had triggered the exact clause Lillian had written to stop her. The moment Denise attempted fraud, everything she wanted went to Vera and Charity. Lillian had built a legal trap that activated itself. I was still standing there with the UV lamp when I heard the knock at the file room door. Griffin entered. His face was grim. He was holding something carefully wrapped in a dish towel. The maple syrup bottle from my kitchen counter, half empty. Organic Vermont brand. The kind Lillian had always bought. Dad, Griffin said. I need you to look at this. Really look at it. He tilted the bottle slowly in the dawn light coming through the window. At the bottom, separated from the amber syrup, was a bluish-green sediment, chemical iridescence, something that should not be in maple syrup. I have been watching the kitchen camera since you told me about Denise's visit, Griffin said. She touched this bottle Wednesday evening. She was alone with it for 3 minutes. You need to understand something about slow poisons. By the time you discover them, they have already been working. The question is not whether you have been poisoned. The question is how much time you have left. Ethylene glycol, Griffin said quietly. Antifreeze. It is sweet. You would not taste it in maple syrup. It dissolves clear but separates over time, leaves that bluish-green sediment. I looked at the bottle in his hands. How long have you been using this bottle, Dad? I thought back, counted days. 10 days, maybe 15. Griffin's jaw tightened. She came by 3 weeks ago, remember? Stopped in for 20 minutes. Said she was checking on you after Mom died. Long enough to switch one bottle for another. 3 weeks ago. A brief visit I had barely registered. Denise in the kitchen while I was in the workshop. 20 minutes alone with my pantry. Ethylene glycol poisoning is slow, deliberate. It mimics kidney failure. Takes weeks to months for a fatal dose to accumulate. Symptoms are subtle at first: fatigue, back pain, decreased appetite. I had all three. I had been tired for weeks. My back ached when I woke up. I had stopped eating full meals, thought it was grief suppressing my appetite. It was poison. She was patient, Griffin said. Planned for you to die by Christmas. Natural causes. Grieving 75-year-old widower, kidney failure from age and stress. No one would question it. I thought about my morning routine. Oatmeal with maple syrup. Every single morning since Lillian died. She had always made it that way: warm oats, a drizzle of Vermont maple syrup, a pinch of cinnamon. Denise knew that. She had been counting on it. 10 days of poison already in my system. Maybe more. And I still had months to go before her Christmas deadline. The bottle sat on the counter, wrapped in Griffin's dish towel, like the evidence it was. The bluish-green sediment catching the morning light. Beautiful and deadly. Maple syrup. She had chosen maple syrup because Lillian had always made my oatmeal that way every morning for 48 years, and Denise knew that habit would not change after Lillian died. She had been counting on it. Griffin set the bottle down carefully on the file room desk and looked at me with the same expression I had seen on his face the day Lillian died, the look of a son trying to figure out how to save his father from something he could not fight with his hands. Griffin set the syrup bottle down carefully and said there was more evidence he had been gathering for weeks, waiting until he had enough to be certain before breaking my heart completely. Come to my studio, he said. You need to see this. I followed him across the property to the converted barn where he worked. The space smelled like wet clay and wood smoke from the kiln. But when we entered, Griffin led me past his pottery wheel to a corner I had not paid attention to before. A computer setup sophisticated for a potter. Multiple monitors. External hard drives stacked like books. Data recovery software running on one screen, progress bars moving slowly across digital files. I have been recovering deleted files for 3 weeks, Dad, Griffin said, from the family cloud storage. Things Denise thought she had erased permanently. How? I took a digital forensics course during COVID, he said. Thought it was interesting. Never thought I would use it like this. He pulled up a chair for me. You need to sit down. What I am about to show you, you need to be sitting. I sat. Griffin typed commands. Files appeared on the screen. Email exchanges recovered from deleted folders, timestamps showing when they had been removed, when Griffin had reconstructed them from backup fragments. The first exchange was dated February through May 2022, 4 months before Lillian died. Denise emailing a pharmacy tech in Portland, requesting correct dosage adjustment for mother's heart medication. The tech responding with confusion dosage was already correct per doctor's prescription. Denise insisting, providing what she claimed was doctor authorization. The tech asking for direct confirmation from the physician. Denise sending a forged authorization letter. A second email chain in April. Denise ordering different medication entirely under Lillian's name, having it delivered to her Portland office address, not to our Camden home. Then bringing it to Camden herself, telling us she was helping manage Mom's prescriptions because the pharmacy kept getting confused. Lillian's actual prescribed beta blockers, swapped for calcium channel blockers. These emails are from February through May 2022, Griffin said quietly. 4 months before Mom died. I do not understand. She was not adjusting Mom's medication. She was replacing it with the wrong kind. Medication that would accelerate heart failure in someone with Mom's specific condition. I stared at the screen. The pharmacy tech kept asking for doctor confirmation, Griffin continued. Denise forged it, multiple times. She was systematic, patient. She killed Mom over 4 months and made it look like her heart condition getting worse naturally. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from learning your wife died, protecting you from the child you both raised. It does not feel like grief. It feels like your chest has been opened and everything inside removed while you are still conscious. There is more, Griffin said. He pulled up a different email. One recovered from Lillian's account, not Denise's, sent to an anonymous address. Dated May 15, 2022, 3 weeks before Lillian died. The address traced to Rockland, to Vera Sutton. Lillian's words on the screen. I know what Denise is doing with my medication. I have changed my will to protect Howard and Griffin, but I may not have time to tell him everything. If something happens to me before Christmas, you need to watch over them. She will come for the land next. Mom sent this to Vera 3 weeks before she died, Griffin said. They had been in contact. Mom knew what Denise was doing, and she spent her last weeks protecting us instead of trying to save herself. I could not speak. Lillian had known, had felt her heart failing as the wrong medication accumulated in her system, had understood exactly what was happening and why. And instead of fighting to survive, she had spent her final energy building invisible ink clauses into wills, contacting estranged sisters-in-law, preparing evidence systems I would not discover until after she was gone. That is not all, Griffin said. He pulled up different files, public records, obituaries, legal filings he had cross-referenced over weeks of research. 2 names I did not recognize. Martin Blackwood, Gerald Whitmore, 2 of Denise's divorce clients, Griffin said. Both elderly, both wealthy, both died of heart failure right before their divorce settlements finalized. Martin Blackwood, 68, died September 2019. Contentious divorce, substantial estate. Died of spontaneous heart failure 3 weeks before settlement. Children hired Denise to execute the estate. She made a fortune on the inheritance work. Gerald Whitmore, 72, died January 2020. Similar pattern. Filed for divorce 2 months later, dead of heart failure. Children retained Denise for estate litigation. No investigations. Elderly men with heart conditions. Expected deaths. The pattern only visible when you knew to look for it. When you discover your child is not a murderer, but a serial killer, someone who has done this successfully before, who has refined the method, who has escaped investigation twice, you do not process it like normal information. You process it like a lighthouse keeper reading a signal that means total disaster is already here. She has done this before, Dad, Griffin said. This is not new. This is what she does. One more file. Text message exchange. Recovered from cell carrier metadata, Griffin had legally requested as concerned family member after Lillian's death made him suspicious. Deleted from Denise's device. Retrieved anyway. Dated 1 week ago. Denise to unknown number. After the old man is handled, we need to discuss your compensation package. Reply the amount we agreed. Denise. Adjusted for risk factors and ongoing compliance requirements. She was going to kill Pierce too, Griffin said. After you. To avoid paying him and to eliminate the witness. Adjusted for risk factors and ongoing compliance requirements. Lawyer code for permanent silence. Everyone was disposable to her dad. You, mom, her clients, her accomplice, everyone. I looked at the screen showing my daughter's systematic elimination of everyone who stood between her and money. Griffin's hand was on my shoulder. I heard him speaking but could not process the words. I stood up, walked out of the studio, crossed the property to the edge where the land meets the Atlantic, and the black walnut forest ends at the rocks, and I did not make a sound. I stood where the black walnut forest meets the rocks, and the rocks meet the Atlantic, and I let the sound of the waves do what it had done for 75 years, clear my mind until I could think again. Thursday afternoon, sun angling lower, purple lupines blooming along the cliff edge, salt air and seabird cries and wind steady from the northeast. The ocean stretching endless and constant. The ocean does not care about your daughter murdering your wife. It does not care about poison or forgery or inheritance schemes. It just moves, in and out, constant. I needed that constancy. Griffin had let me walk out here alone. He understood. Some things a man has to work through by himself. Denise was still my daughter. I had held her when she was born, taught her to read, walked her down the aisle at her wedding 6 years ago. Lillian's daughter, my only daughter. That biological fact did not change, but she had killed Lillian, killed her own mother, killed 2 strangers men who trusted her as their lawyer, was killing me, planned to kill Pierce, not in rage or passion, systematically, over 5 years, refined methods, escaped investigation twice. This was not my daughter making one terrible mistake. This was someone wearing my daughter's face who had become something I did not recognize. Family versus justice, blood versus duty. 35 years keeping lighthouses taught me one thing: you do not save your family at the expense of everyone else's safety. The moment you put personal loyalty above warning ships of danger, you are not a lighthouse keeper anymore. The answer was clear. It had always been clear. But knowing the right thing and doing it are different when the person who needs to be stopped is someone you raised. I stood at the cliff edge and let the waves work on that pain until it settled into something I could carry. Then I started thinking like a lighthouse keeper instead of a father, reading signals, fog, current, barometric pressure, ship lights. You observe, you document, you confirm. You do not rush interpretation because rushing causes disasters. Reading danger is like reading weather. You do not trust your emotions. You trust the barometer. And every signal I had said the storm is real, the storm is close, but it has not crested yet. Wait for the right moment. I had evidence. UV powder footprints, Pierce's DNA in sawdust, vibration audio, Griffin's camera footage, forged will versus invisible ink original, poisoned maple syrup, recovered emails showing medication murder. But evidence is not the same as a legal case. A legal case needs professional documentation, chain of custody, forensic confirmation, expert testimony, process that holds up when a defense attorney tries to tear it apart. If I went to police today, Denise would lawyer up immediately, claim the UV powder was contamination. The audio manipulated, the emails fabricated, the will clause invalid. She was a divorce lawyer. She knew how to fight legal battles. She knew how to create reasonable doubt. And if she sensed walls closing in before I had everything locked down, she would run, or destroy evidence, or hurt someone else. 35 years on lighthouse stations taught me how to read danger building. You do not rush. You document. You confirm. You wait for the right moment to light the beacon. Let me tell you what 35 years of lighthouse keeping teaches you about waiting. The difference between patience and cowardice is whether you are using the time to prepare. I was going to prepare. My plan crystallized. I would not go to police today. I would get medical treatment for antifreeze exposure. Quietly. through a doctor who would document the poisoning professionally for legal use. I would have Philip Garrison verify the invisible ink clause was legally valid. Get it notarized. Get expert confirmation of Lillian's chemical watermark. I would have Griffin compile his digital evidence properly. Sworn statements, expert certification. I would document everything the way Lillian had methodically, carefully building a case that could not be dismantled. Denise thought she had until Christmas. That gave me months to build something she could not escape. This was not revenge. This was what you do when storm signals say disaster is coming, and you are the only one who can warn everyone else. Lillian would approve this approach. She had built the trap. I was going to spring it correctly. But there was one piece I did not understand yet. Vera, the old woman at the hardware store, who appeared with perfect timing, perfect knowledge, perfect instructions, who knew about my UV lamp before I mentioned my lighthouse career, who told me exactly what would happen exactly, where Pierce would go exactly when. She had been right about everything. Lillian had contacted her before she died. They had worked together on the invisible ink will clause. They had planned something I was only beginning to see. But who was she? How did she know to watch my property from the forest edge? Why did she track Denise from Portland? Why spend 40 years estranged and then appear precisely when I needed someone watching? The hardware store meeting was not chance. It was orchestrated. She knew my Monday routine. She knew I would pay for her brushes. She knew exactly how to position herself in my path. Vera was not just a helpful stranger. She was a key architect in something Lillian had built, and I did not fully understand her role yet. I needed to find her, not to thank her. To understand what Lillian had set in motion that I had not seen yet. 35 years of reading the ocean taught me when a storm was still building, when the signals said wait when rushing meant disaster. I had my evidence, I had my plan, but I needed one more thing. I needed to understand who Vera really was and what else she and Lillian had prepared together. Friday morning, I drove into Camden carrying 2 wills and a UV lamp, and I walked into Philip Garrison's law office knowing he would tell me whether Lillian's invisible ink trap was real or whether I had imagined salvation in purple light. Philip had worked this office for 40 years. Main Street, Camden, 2nd floor above the hardware store where I had met Vera. The place smelled like old law books and coffee, and the kind of quiet that comes from holding people's secrets for decades. He looked up when I entered, saw my face, knew something major had happened. I set both wills on his desk, the forged copy from my filing cabinet, the original from the secret drawer behind the bookshelf. Then I set down the UV lamp. Philip looked at the 2 documents, then at the lamp, then at my face. He did not ask questions. He just nodded. How long have we known each other? Howard, he asked. Since we were 10 years old. Then you know I am about to ask you to do something that matters, I said. And you know I would not ask if it was not real. Show me. Philip closed the blinds, darkened the office, turned on the UV lamp. He examined the forged will first. Under the purple-blue light, the paper glowed pure white. No chemical signature, no watermark, no authentication markers of any kind. This one is white, Philip said quietly, holding it up to the UV lamp. Pure white. No chemical treatment at all. Lillian always treated important documents with preservation solution, I said. Habit from the museum. This has none, Philip confirmed. This is a forgery, Howard. Recent. Maybe 2 weeks old based on the paper stock and printer characteristics. He set it aside, picked up the original, held it under the UV lamp. The paper glowed faint blue-green. Lillian's chemical watermark. The authentication marker only someone trained in preservation chemistry would know to apply. And then in the margins and on the reverse page, purple text began appearing where blank paper had shown in normal light. Invisible ink. Lillian's handwriting. Philip read it aloud slowly. If any child or heir attempts by any means legal, fraudulent, or coercive to seize control of estate assets before testator's natural death, said attempt shall trigger automatic forfeiture of all inheritance rights. Entire estate shall transfer to designated charitable trust and / or Vera Sutton. He paused, looked at the date. January 15th, 2022, he said, 6 months before Lillian died. When you see your dead wife's handwriting appear in invisible ink under ultraviolet light, spelling out the legal trap she built to save you 6 months before she died, you do not process it as evidence. You process it as a voice from beyond the grave saying, I knew, I prepared. I loved you enough to plan your survival. Witnessed by Philip Garrison. He continued, his voice quieter now. With notation UV verification required. You helped her write this, I said. Philip nodded. I hoped you would never need to read it. Before Philip tells me what Lillian knew 6 months before she died, I need to pause. Are you still with me right now? Comment. A. If you think Lillian should have told Howard the truth, or B. If her silence was the right choice, and add one reason why in 10 words or less. Please note the next part contains some recreated details for storytelling purposes, but the message is what matters. Philip set the will down carefully. She came here in January, he said. January 2022. Said she knew Denise was changing her medication. She had noticed the pills looked different. She researched them, found they were the wrong prescription for her condition. She knew what Denise was doing, and she knew she might not have much time. Philip's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. First time I had seen him cry in 65 years of friendship. She asked me to help her write a legal trap, he continued. Something that would spring only if Denise tried to take the estate before you died naturally. The invisible ink clause using preservation chemicals she provided from the museum. Only visible under UV light, the kind you would have from your lighthouse work. She was betting I would find the UV lamp eventually. She was betting someone would tell you to look, Philip said. And she was right. Lillian had spent her last 6 months preparing to protect me. Not fighting to save herself. Not exposing Denise and risking a confrontation that might escalate to immediate violence. Just quietly, methodically building the trap that would spring after she was gone. Chemical treatment. Invisible ink. Legal language. Witness verification. Everything I needed to stop Denise. Everything I needed to survive. Who is Vera Sutton? I asked. Philip looked up. The woman from the hardware store, I said. The woman in Lillian's will clause. The woman Lillian contacted before she died. Who is she? There is a particular feeling that comes when your lawyer, your friend since childhood, starts pulling family land records from 40 years ago with the expression that says, this is going to change how you understand your entire life. I had that feeling. Philip went to his filing cabinet. Not the one with current cases. The old one in the corner where he kept Camden family histories, property transfers, estate records going back decades. He pulled a file, dusty, dated 1984, land records, estate transfers, property dispute documentation, names I recognized, names I did not. He read for a moment, then looked up at me with careful eyes. I think I know who your angel in the hardware store is, Howard, he said slowly. And I think you need to sit down before I tell you. I was already sitting, but I gripped the arms of the chair anyway, because I had just realized whose pale gray eyes I had seen in that parking lot. Eyes the exact color of Fresnel lens light on a night with no moon. Eyes I had seen before but could not remember where, until now. She said it before I could. I was wrong about the land. Vera Sutton stood in the doorway of her cottage in Rockland, 20 miles from Camden, with my mother's eyes. Pale gray. The exact color of a Fresnel lens catching morning light. Philip had shown me the file property dispute 1984 siblings estranged over timber rights my father wanted, and her husband refused to sell. 42 years, longer than Lillian and I had been married. Howard, she stepped aside. I've been expecting you since Philip called. The cottage smelled like linseed oil and old wood. Restoration tools lined one wall, planes, chisels, sanders arranged with the precision I recognized from my own workshop. She poured tea into 2 cups without asking if I wanted any. Her hands shook slightly. You funded Denise's law school, I said. No question. Philip had found the anonymous donor records $140,000 spread across 4 years, 2000 to 2004, routed through a Portland legal fund with Vera's signature buried in the paperwork. I did. She sat across from me. I never had children. 42 years of marriage to Douglas, we tried everything. When he died in '98, I had money and no one to leave it to. I thought... Her voice cracked. I thought if I couldn't have my own family, I could help yours. I watched from a distance. Denise seemed brilliant, driven. I didn't know that you were funding a murderer. Vera's cup rattled against the saucer. Philip told me everything. The forged will, the antifreeze, She closed her eyes. The invisible ink clause with my name in it. Lillian put you in the will 6 months before she died, I said. January 2022. You're telling me that was random? No. Vera opened her eyes. It wasn't random. The first pattern interrupt hit me then, not shock, but recognition. The way Vera held her teacup. 3 fingers on the handle, thumb pressed against the rim. Exactly how my mother used to hold hers. Exactly how Lillian had held hers at breakfast the morning before her prescription started looking different. She contacted you, I said. Vera nodded. November 2021. I got a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting from the Christmas cards she used to send before the estrangement got too deep. She said she needed help. She said Denise was changing her medication, and she didn't have much time, and she needed someone outside the family who understood wood and chemistry and secrecy. UV powder. She knew about my restoration work. Knew I used ultraviolet analysis for antique authentication. Knew I had access to the same chemicals she'd used at the Maritime Museum preservation compounds, invisible inks detection agents. Vera's hands steadied. She asked me 3 things. First, could I get UV powder that would mark footprints but stay invisible under normal light? Second, could I help her write a legal clause using invisible ink that would only show under UV verification? Third, could I watch over you after she was gone? Why didn't she tell me? My voice sounded hollow. Why didn't she save herself? She tried. Vera reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Lillian's handwriting. Dated January 8th, 2022. She confronted Denise on January 5th, told her she knew about the pills. Denise cried, apologized, said it was a pharmacy error and she'd fix it immediately. Lillian wanted to believe her. She waited 3 days. On January 8th, she took one of the new pills to a pharmacist friend in Portland. Wrong medication entirely. Not even close to what her prescription should have been. The second pattern interrupt came quieter memory of Lillian, that January, suddenly obsessed with organizing her archives at the museum. Late nights in her office. I'd thought she was preparing for retirement. She was preparing for death. She knew she couldn't stop Denise without proof. Vera continued. And she knew if she tried to expose her directly, Denise would lawyer her way out of it or accelerate the timeline. So she built a trap instead. She came to me because we both understood the same thing about wood and time. If you want something to last, you work with the grain. You don't fight the force, you redirect it. The UV powder at the hardware store, I said. That was you. Lillian's instruction. She said you'd figure out the footprints eventually. Said you'd go to Bradshaw's Hardware because you always did. Said I should give you exactly $10 and instructions for the parking lot, Because you'd need to hear it from someone who looked like— Vera's voice broke. Like family. I thought about the pale gray eyes in that parking lot. The way she'd known my name. The way she'd disappeared before I could ask questions. She spent 6 months protecting me instead of saving herself, I said. Vera slid the envelope across the table. She left you one more thing. She made me promise to give it to you only after Philip showed you the invisible ink clause. Only after you knew she'd planned everything. I opened the envelope. Lillian's handwriting dated May 28th, 2022. 2 weeks before she died. Howard, if you're reading this, Vera kept her promise and Philip kept his, and you know. Now what I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I couldn't watch you grieve while I was still here. I needed you sharp. I needed you angry enough to investigate, but not so broken you'd miss the clues. Denise is brilliant and careful, and she's done this before. Griffin will tell you about the others when the time comes. But I built you a map. 6 layers of evidence. The last one is inside the lighthouse sculpture in your workshop. The one I finished in April. Look inside it, my love. And when you find what's there, you'll know how to end this. L***. I looked up at Vera. The lighthouse sculpture. It's been in your workshop for 6 months, she said quietly. Waiting. I drove back to Vera's cottage the next morning. The lighthouse sculpture could wait one more day. I needed to hear the whole story, not just the facts Philip had shown me in manila folders, but the 40 years of silence that had brought my sister and my dead wife together in conspiracy. Vera stood at her door before I knocked. Mother's pale gray eyes. She'd been waiting. She contacted you, I said. Not a question. Vera stepped aside. I wondered when you'd figure that part out. The cottage kitchen smelled like Earl Grey and linseed oil. She poured 2 cups without asking, set them on a pine table scarred with 40 years of restoration work. Her hands were steady now. Mine weren't. The land, she started. 1984. I wanted the coastal parcel. You got it in Father's will. I said— Her voice caught. I said you'd always been his favorite, that you'd stolen my inheritance, that I never wanted to see you again. 40 years over 5 acres, 40 years over wounded pride. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Douglas told me I was being foolish, said family mattered more than property. I didn't listen. Then he died in '98, and I had all the land I'd wanted and no one to share it with. I watched steam rise from my tea, lapsang souchong, the same blend Lillian used to drink at breakfast. Vera had remembered. We never had children, she continued. Tried everything. Treatments, prayers, years of hoping. House stayed empty. After Douglas died, I started following your life from a distance. Public records, newspaper clippings. Saw Griffin's pottery win awards. Saw Denise accepted to law school in 2000. You watched us for 20 years. She met my eyes. Childless women do strange things with loneliness, Howard. I convinced myself if I couldn't have my own family, I could at least help yours. Quietly, from wherever I'd exiled myself to. The first pattern interrupt hit me then, not anger, but recognition. The way Vera held her teacup. 3 fingers on the handle, thumb against the rim, exactly how Mother used to hold hers. Exactly how Lillian had held hers every morning before the pills changed. My hands shook. Tea sloshed over the rim. Vera's weathered craftswoman's hands caught the saucer, steadied it. The law school money, I said. 3 years. Every semester. Anonymous money orders through a Portland legal fund. $54,000 total. Vera's voice went hollow. I thought I was atoning for the estrangement. Thought I was helping you raise a brilliant daughter. Didn't know what she'd become. What she'd do with that education. You funded her law degree. She used it to forge wills and murder her mother. God help me, Howard. Vera closed her eyes. I paid for the tools she used to kill Lillian. I looked around the cottage. Restoration tools lined every wall, planes, chisels, sanders arranged with lighthouse precision, paintbrushes in mason jars. A UV lamp on the corner shelf twinned to the one I'd carried into my workshop 6 months ago. The brushes, I said. What do you restore? Wood. Furniture, doors, frames. 40 years. She opened her eyes. I read workshops the way sailors read tides. That's how I knew what Pierce and Denise were doing in yours. Saw the sawdust pattern from the tree line. Saw them measuring the stairs. Craftswoman knows sabotage when she sees it. That's why Lillian came to you, Vera nodded. December 2021. She showed up at this door. No warning. First time I'd seen her in 15 years. Said she needed a craftswoman who could keep secrets. Said Denise was changing her medication, and she didn't have much time. Said she needed someone who understood wood and UV chemistry and invisible ink preservation, all the museum archive work she'd done, but couldn't do herself without Denise noticing. She recruited you for the trap. She gave me a choice. Vera stood, walked to a drawer, pulled out a folder. She said, Vera, you've been watching Howard's family for 20 years. Now I'm asking you to help me save him. He won't believe it's happening until it's almost too late. That's how these things work. But if we build the evidence carefully enough when he finally sees it, he'll have everything he needs to survive. She handed me the folder. Inside Lillian's handwriting. Dated January 12th, 2022. 6 months before she died. The second pattern interrupt came quieter. Reader, I'd spent 6 months believing I was alone in this. Believing Lillian had died without warning, without preparation, without leaving me anything except grief and a lighthouse lamp I'd barely understood. I was wrong. I'd been wrong about everything. She spent 3 months testing UV powders with me, Vera said. Finding the right chemical signature. Teaching me about your workshop routines when you'd use the lamp, how you'd notice footprints. She wrote the invisible ink clause with Philip, but had me source the preservation compounds so they'd match museum standards. She planned every layer. The sawdust for DNA. The audio for Russell's recording. The wooden eye camera Griffin would install. She knew Denise was meticulous. Knew we had to be more meticulous. Why didn't she tell me? Because you'd have tried to save her instead of yourself. Because you'd have confronted Denise too early before the evidence was ready. Because... Vera's voice broke. Because she loved you too much to watch you grieve while she was still alive. She pulled out one more envelope. Lillian's handwriting. Addressed to me. Dated May 30th, 2022. 4 days before she died. She made me promise I'd only give you this after Philip showed you the invisible ink clause. After you knew she'd planned everything. I opened it with shaking hands. Howard. If you're reading this, you know now. Vera kept her promise. Griffin will keep his. Russell kept his. I didn't leave you alone, my love. I left you an army. People who understood what Denise is and helped me build the map you'd need to survive her. The evidence is in 6 layers. The last one is inside the lighthouse sculpture in your workshop, the one I finished in April and never explained. Look inside it. You'll know what to do. Save yourself, Howard. I couldn't save myself, but I could save you. That was enough. I wept at Vera's kitchen table. First time since Lillian's death. Felt my sister's hand cover mine. Mother's eyes watching. Lillian hadn't just left me a will. She'd left me an army. She just hadn't told me where to find it. I drove back to Camden alone, Lillian's letter warm against my chest like a living thing. Vera's cottage disappeared in the rearview mirror. 20 miles of coastal highway headlights cutting through fog, and I couldn't stop feeling the weight of the envelope tucked inside my jacket. The workshop barn was dark when I arrived. I flipped the switch, yellow light flooded familiar space. Walnut smell. Tool shadows on pegboard walls. The chair Lillian had made me from reclaimed pier wood sat in the corner where I'd left it 6 months ago. I sat, opened the letter, her handwriting steadier than I remembered. Dated May 30th, 2022. 4 days before she died. Howard, I'm writing this in our bedroom while you're down at Russell's Forge talking about hinge repair like the world isn't ending. I can't tell you what's happening. I tried once, thought about it 100 times, but I know you too well. You'd protect her. You always did. Even when she stole Griffin's college fund for her first year of law school, you called it a loan. Even when she screamed at Iris for wearing your mother's necklace at the wedding, you called it grief. You see the daughter we raised, not the woman she became. I couldn't risk that. Couldn't risk you warning her or confronting her too early or trying to fix something that stopped being fixable years ago. So I chose a different way. I contacted Vera in November, asked her to help me build a trap Denise would walk into herself, asked Griffin to install cameras and sensors you wouldn't notice, asked Russell to teach you Morse code without explaining why, asked Philip to write an invisible ink clause only you would think to verify. I impregnated the will with preservation chemicals, mixed UV powder with Vera's restoration compounds, documented every pill swap, every conversation, every moment I knew she was killing me. I spent 6 months preparing evidence instead of fighting back because I understood something. You're only learning now she's too smart for direct confrontation. She'd lawyer her way out. She'd charm investigators. She'd make me look paranoid, and you look complicit. But evidence doesn't lie. Evidence builds. Evidence compounds until there's no defense left. I stopped reading. My hands shook. The entry twist hit me like a fist. Lillian's silence hadn't been weakness or fear. It had been strategy. She'd known exactly what I'd do if she'd told me the truth. Known I'd have tried to save Denise instead of myself. I kept reading. The sculpture is the last piece. The lighthouse I carved in April and put in your workshop without explanation. You probably walked past it 100 times these 6 months wondering why I'd made it. Look inside the base. There's a cavity I carved before assembly. Inside, you'll find a USB drive with video. Griffin recorded 45 seconds of Denise and Pierce in your workshop, measuring the staircase 2 weeks before I died. Audio is clear. Intent is clear. Wear gloves when you handle it. Preserve chain of custody. The walnut knows how to keep what matters, my love. You taught me that our first summer here showed me how walnut heartwood resists decay, how it holds shape across decades, how it remembers. I hope I taught it back to you in time. Save yourself, Howard. I couldn't save myself, but I could save you. That was enough, L. I sat in the chair she'd built me. Walnut smell rose from the floorboards, 40 years of sawdust ground into grain. Lillian's lavender perfume still ghost present in the air. The pattern interrupt came gentle this time. Not shock, but recognition. She'd known I'd sit here. Known I'd read this letter in this exact chair, surrounded by tools we'd collected together, breathing air still shaped by her presence. I stood. Found the lighthouse sculpture on the back shelf. Turned it over. The base had a removable panel I'd never noticed. Inside, a USB drive in a sealed evidence bag. Griffin's handwriting on the label, Workshop Intrusion, April 12, 2022, wooden eye camera, 45 seconds. I slept 3 hours. When I woke, it was Saturday morning. Griffin and Russell arrived at the farmhouse kitchen table at 8. First time the three of us had sat together like this, 3 generations of Kendrick men, carpenter and potter and blacksmith, united by a dead woman's conspiracy. Russell's border collie Cinder settled beneath his chair. The old blacksmith looked at me with 70 years of Maine winter in his eyes. First time we 3 sit together, he said. Feels overdue. Griffin set a cardboard file box on the table. Grandmother knew what she was doing. We spent 2 hours arranging evidence. Layer by layer, methodical. Layer 1, photographs of UV. Powder footprints, purple trails from workshop stairs to side door, Denise's shoe size, Pierce's boot pattern. Layer 2, plastic bag containing walnut sawdust from staircase cut marks. DNA ready, chain of custody documented. Layer 3, Russell's audio recording vibration sensor data from 2 a.m. intrusion, Morse code, translation, death threat, transcribed. Layer 4, USB drive from Wooden Eye camera. 45 seconds of Denise and Pierce measuring staircase, discussing load-bearing calculations, planning structural failure. Layer 5. Maple syrup bottle from refrigerator. Antifreeze contamination. My breakfast bottle. The one I'd never opened because Griffin had warned me the morning after Lillian died. Layer 6, both wills. Forged version with beneficiary fraud. Original with UV revealed invisible ink clause triggering automatic forfeiture. Russell leaned back. Your wife chose well, Howard. She always did. Cinder whined suddenly. We froze. Footsteps outside, but just whined against the barn door. Loose hinge I'd been meaning to fix for months. Griffin opened his file box, pulled out 2 manila folders. Older. Legal paper. Court stamps. I did some research, he said quietly. Denise has represented 18 estate clients in the past 7 years. 2 of them died within 6 months of signing new wills that favored distant relatives over immediate family. Both deaths ruled natural causes. Both wills Denise had drafted. Both estates she collected fees from. He slid the folders across the table. Names I didn't recognize. Dates that formed a pattern. Beneficiary changes. Sudden deaths. Legal fees. She's done this before, I said. Griffin nodded. At least twice that I can prove. Probably more. I looked at the evidence array spread across my kitchen table. 6 independent layers. Any one would have been enough to raise questions. Together they formed a web no lawyer could escape. No charm could deflect. No explanation could rationalize. Lillian had understood that from the beginning. Built redundancy into every layer. New prosecutors needed overwhelming proof, not reasonable doubt. Time to deliver. The boxes were heavier than I expected, not the evidence itself, but what came after. Griffin and I carried them into Camden Police Station Saturday afternoon. 2 cardboard file boxes and 1 sealed evidence bag containing the maple syrup bottle. The desk sergeant looked up, saw my face, and called for Detective Carla Brennan without asking questions. She was 48, I guessed, with the steady eyes of someone who'd seen worse than what I was about to show her. Gray suit, wedding ring, no nonsense. No. Mr. Kendrick? She shook my hand. Your son called ahead. Let's use the conference room. We spread it out methodically. 6 layers. Griffin handled narration Potter's precision, explaining chain of custody timeline connections. I watched Detective Brennan's face shift from professional courtesy to active attention to something colder. She stopped us at the USB drive. 45 seconds of your daughter and an accomplice planning structural sabotage to cause your death, she repeated. Yes. She picked up the case files Griffin had added. Read the names, read the dates. Looked up. This is interstate, she said. I'm calling FBI. The entry twist arrived faster than I'd expected. FBI agent Hayes was on the phone within 10 minutes. Detective Brennan put him on speaker. The 2 names in those files, Hayes said, his voice flat and professional. Denise Kendrick's already flagged in our database. Cross-state suspicious deaths involving estate attorneys. We've been watching her for 8 months. Didn't have enough to move. You just gave us enough. Griffin's hand found my shoulder. Hayes continued. Go home. Act normal. Do not contact your daughter. Do not tell anyone we spoke. We'll need 48 to 72 hours to coordinate with Maine Attorney General. Process the evidence. Build the warrant. We'll call when it's time. Detective Brennan cataloged everything into evidence bags. Photographs, signatures, timestamps. She handed me a receipt with 11 item numbers. Your wife was thorough, she said quietly. I'm sorry for your loss. I drove home alone. Griffin went to Iris and Jasper. I entered the empty farmhouse and felt the weight of waiting settle over me like coastal fog. 11 days. I returned to the workshop the next morning. Carved a walnut box, simple design, tight joinery hands, steady with familiar rhythm. Vera arrived Monday with 2 suitcases and a determination I recognized from our mother. "You shouldn't be alone," she said. Not a question. She cooked. Watched Jasper when Iris needed help at the gallery. Made evening tea. We didn't talk about the evidence or the FBI or what came next. We talked about wood restoration and lighthouse mechanics and the weather turning cold. Denise called Tuesday, then Friday, then the following Monday. "Just checking in, Dad. Everything okay?" "Fine, sweetheart. Working on a new box." My voice stayed steady. 40 years of lighthouse maintenance had taught me to keep my hands calm during storms. This was no different. "You sound tired." "Just age catching up. How's the law practice?" "Busy. Estate work never stops." She laughed. The sound made my stomach turn. "I should visit soon." "Whenever you're ready." I hung up and felt Vera's hand on my arm. She'd been listening from the kitchen doorway. "Lillian trained you well," she said. "Waiting is a discipline." Lillian had understood that 40 years married to a man who watched tide schedules and weather patterns and knew that rushing the sea only got you drowned. She'd waited 6 months while Denise poisoned her. Built evidence while dying. I could wait 11 days. On day 8, I removed the old life preserver from the workshop wall. Police had returned it after evidence sampling Pierce's hidden compartment empty, now the cocaine long catalogued and destroyed. I was going to store it in the barn loft when I noticed something. The compartment Pierce had used wasn't quite empty, tucked in a gap between the foam casing and outer canvas, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, a stack of letters tied with twine. Yellowed paper. Lillian's handwriting. I sat on the workshop floor and read them. Love letters from our first 5 years of marriage. A diary entry from the summer we bought this property. Notes she'd written and never sent, observations about Griffin as a baby, about my father's funeral, about the first time she'd watched me restore a Fresnel lens and realized she'd married someone who understood light. The exit twist hit me like cold water. Lillian had hidden her heart in the same place Pierce would hide his crime 30 years later. Same compartment, same life preserver, years apart, neither knowing about the other. Coincidence or prophecy, I'd never know. I transferred the letters carefully to the cedar box I'd been finishing. Preservation-grade wood. Tight seal. They'd last another 50 years if anyone wanted to read them. Vera found me in the workshop an hour later, letters spread on my workbench, hands shaking. She didn't ask questions. Poured tea from the thermos she'd brought. Sat on the stool Lillian used to occupy when she'd watch me work. Said nothing. I picked up one letter, dated July 1979. Lillian describing the lighthouse property, how she'd stood at the edge of the bluff and imagined raising children here, growing old, here being buried here. My fingers traced her handwriting. 30 years old. Ink faded. Love still sharp as fresh-cut pine. "I'll leave you alone with her," Vera said quietly. She left. I read until the light failed. Read about the woman who'd loved me enough to die protecting me. Who'd orchestrated a conspiracy I'd never suspected. Who'd hidden love letters in a life preserver that would later hide evidence of her murder. Day 11. Friday evening, 7 p.m. I was washing dishes when the phone rang. Vera was reading to Jasper in the living room. Through the window, I could see lights on at Russell's forge, heard his hammer stop mid-strike. Cinder barked once. Sharp. Urgent. I dried my hands. Walked to the phone. Let it ring twice more. Picked up. "Mr. Kendrick." Detective Brennan's voice. Professional. Final. "It's time." Detective Brennan's voice came through at dawn. "They're moving now." I'd slept 3 hours. Vera was already in the kitchen making coffee when my phone rang at 5:30 a.m. Day 12. Tuesday morning. Outside, the sky was still dark. Portland office first, Brennan said. FBI's coordinating both arrests simultaneously. Agent Hayes is leading Denise's team. I'll call you when it's done. I waited by the phone, drank coffee that tasted like copper, watched dawn break over the bluff. Vera sat across from me, silent hands wrapped around her own cup. We didn't speak. The phone rang at 8:20. She's in custody, Brennan said. No incident. Tell me. 8:15. AM FBI surrounded her Portland office building. 6 agents. Agent Hayes waited at the front entrance. Your daughter exited carrying a briefcase, looked like a normal workday. Saw the federal vehicles. Froze. Hayes identified himself. Read her rights. She didn't say a word. Didn't resist. Let them cuff her like she'd been expecting it. I closed my eyes. Saw Denise at 6 years old holding my hand at the lighthouse. Saw her at 22 law school graduation, proud smile. Saw her at 45 standing in handcuffs outside the office she'd built on murder. The charges, I said. Attempted murder, forgery, fraud, conspiracy. Federal charges, this is interstate now. Agent Hayes arrested her personally. She's being processed at the federal building in Portland. No bail recommendation. Vera's hand found mine across the table. And Pierce? Brennan's voice shifted. Funny you should ask. Airport security called us at 8:47. Your grandson was attempting to board a flight to Mexico City. One-way ticket. Cash payment. The entry twist landed cold and sharp. When did he buy it? 5 days ago. 3 days before you walked into my station with those boxes. I felt something crack in my chest. Pierce had planned to run before we'd even submitted the evidence. Before the FBI had moved. He'd known what was coming. Known what they'd done. Bought his escape while I was still reading Lillian's letters and arranging evidence on my kitchen table. He's in custody, Brennan continued. Drug trafficking, conspiracy, evidence tampering. He tried to tell airport security it was a vacation. They found $18,000 cash in his carry-on and cocaine residue in a hidden jacket pocket. He's done, Mr. Kendrick, my grandson. Running like his mother had taught him. Running like he'd always run from consequence, from responsibility, from the family he'd helped try to murder. Cinder whined at the door. I realized I'd been holding my breath for 11 days, since the moment I'd carried those boxes into the police station, since Lillian had died 6 months ago, since the first morning I'd woken alone and known something was fundamentally wrong. I let the breath out slowly. What happens now? Federal prosecutor is building the case. 6 evidence layers, every one independently sufficient for conviction. The UV powder footprints alone would be enough. The video timestamp. The forged will. Your wife built redundancy into everything, Mr. Kendrick. Prosecutor called it the most thorough evidence package he's seen in 20 years. Trial. 6 months, maybe 8. Federal courts move slower, but they're also more thorough. And there's something else. Brennan paused. FBI's investigating a third case. 2019. Another client of your daughter's. Estate attorney work. Elderly woman, no children, changed her will 3 months before sudden death. Natural causes ruled at the time. But the pattern matches. If they can prove it, the exit twist settled over me like frost. Denise's pattern extended further back than any of us had known. Not just the 2 cases Griffin had found. Not just Lillian. A third victim. Maybe more we hadn't discovered yet. Years of calculated murder hidden behind legal paperwork and professional competence. Mr. Kendrick, you're safe now. That's what matters. The immediate danger is over. Both of them are in federal custody. Neither is getting bail. Your property is secure. Your life is secure. The rest is just process. Thank you, detective. Thank your wife. She did the work. I just answered the phone. I hung up. Sat at this kitchen table. Vera squeezed my hand once and stood to pour more coffee. Through the window, I saw movement at the fence line. Russell stood there, 70 years old. Blacksmith's shoulders. His hammer hung idle at his side, first time in weeks. I'd seen him standing still during working hours. He met my eyes across 40 yards of coastal grass. Nodded once, slow, deliberate. Said nothing. I nodded back. He turned and walked to his forge. Cinder followed. That was all. 40 years of neighbors, of shared fence lines and borrowed tools and unspoken understanding. Some truths don't require words. Russell had helped Lillian build her trap, had recorded the Morse code threat, had waited with me through 11 days of disciplined silence. Now it was done. The acknowledgement was enough. Relief doesn't arrive like thunder. It seeps in gradual as tide returning to familiar shore. I felt it in my hands first, the tremor that had lived in my fingers since Lillian's death finally easing. Then in my chest, the weight I'd carried lightening increment by increment. I walked to the workshop, sat in the walnut chair Lillian had built, smelled linseed oil and 40 years of sawdust, looked at the tools arranged on pegboard walls, planes and chisels and sanders, each one placed exactly where it belonged. It was over. The part that could kill me was over. No more antifreeze in my breakfast syrup. No more sabotaged staircase waiting to collapse. No more forged documents dividing my property among murderers. No more daughter planning my death while calling to check if I was okay. Trial remained. 6 months, maybe 8. I'd have to testify. Sit in a federal courtroom and explain how my daughter had poisoned my wife and tried to poison me. How my grandson had hidden cocaine in a life preserver and planned to flee to Mexico with cash and lies. I'd have to say it all out loud. Make it real, make it permanent. But on a Tuesday morning in Camden, sitting in a chair, my dead wife had built me breathing air that still smelled like her lavender perfume, knowing the immediate danger had ended. That was enough. The courtroom smelled like polished oak and 40 years of other people's justice. 7 months had passed since the arrests. 7 months of depositions and evidence review and sleepless nights. Now I sat in the witness gallery of the federal courthouse in Portland Griffin on my left. Vera on my right, Russell behind us. The jury, 12 strangers who'd never met Lillian, would decide if her conspiracy had been worth dying for. Assistant U, attorney Morgan Sheffield, stood at the prosecution table, 52 years old, gray suit sharp as a scalpel. She'd called me 3 times during preparation, promised me she understood what Lillian had built. Judge Marcus Halloran entered. 68. Federal bench, 23 years. No-nonsense reputation. Everyone rose. The United States versus Denise Marie Kendrick and Pierce Howard Kendrick, the clerk announced. I looked at my daughter across the courtroom. She wore navy blue lawyer's armor. Professional. Composed. Pierce sat beside her in a suit that didn't fit. They didn't look at me. Sheffield began with the wooden eye camera. The defendant believed herself invisible, she said. She was wrong. The screen flickered. Griffin's camera footage filled the wall. 45 seconds of my workshop interior, April 12th, 2022. Denise's shadow crossed the floor. Pierce's hands measured the staircase. Audio clear enough to hear their breathing. The old man keeps syrup in the same spot every week, Pierce's voice said. Just enough to make it look natural, Denise replied. Heart failure. 75 is reasonable. The jury leaned forward. I watched their faces shift from curiosity to horror. Lillian's wooden eye had seen everything, just like I'd taught her craftsman's precision lighthouse methodology. Hide the lens in plain sight. Let the guilty condemn themselves. Sheffield switched slides. UV photographs. Purple footprints glowing against workshop floorboards. Denise's boot tread pattern leading from staircase to side door. Pierce's work boots beside them. Chain of custody documented. Timestamps verified. Invisible to the naked eye, Sheffield said. But under ultraviolet light, the truth glows. Denise's attorney objected. Overruled. The photographs spoke for themselves. Next came Dr. Rachel Voss, forensic expert, mid-40s, 20 years analyzing crime scenes. Sheffield walked her through the sawdust evidence. The defendant's son left DNA in walnut sawdust when he cut partial depth into the staircase support beam, Dr. Voss explained. Walnut's natural antimicrobial properties preserved the sample for 8 months like a time capsule. We recovered sufficient genetic material for positive identification. And the sawdust itself, black walnut, matches the victim's workshop inventory exactly. Cut marks consistent with structural sabotage, enough to weaken the beam, but not enough to fail immediately. Calculated to collapse under weight during normal use. Sheffield nodded. Attempted murder through delayed structural failure. Yes, the toxicologist came next. Ethylene glycol concentrations in my blood tests from 6 months ago. Sublethal doses. Accumulation pattern consistent with regular small quantity poisoning. Maple syrup bottle from my refrigerator. Antifreeze contamination proven through mass spectrometry. The defendant poisoned her father slowly, Sheffield said. Science recorded every dose. My hand found Vera's. Sister and brother. First touch in 40 years. Her fingers closed around mine as we listened to the prosecutor quantify how close Denise had come to succeeding. Then Sheffield played the audio. This recording was captured by vibration sensors installed in the workshop by Mr. Griffin Kendrick, the victim's grandson, and the defendant's nephew. Digital enhancement and filtering were performed by FBI forensic audio specialists. You'll hear 2 voices. We've identified them through voice analysis as the defendants. The courtroom speakers crackled. Russell's vibration sensors converted to sound digitally cleaned. Denise's voice emerged clear and unmistakable. The old man won't make it past this summer anyway. We're just accelerating the inevitable. Pierce's voice. And if the stairs don't work, then the antifreeze does. Or the next accident. There's always another way. The courtroom froze. Denise's face drained of color. Pierce stared at the table. I closed my eyes and heard my daughter plan my death in her own voice, clinical, methodical, certain. I'd heard her say I love you 1,000 times. This hurt more. The mid-twist came during cross-examination. Defense attorney tried to discredit the surveillance timeline. Sheffield smiled. Your Honor, may I call a supplemental witness, Ms. Vera Sutton? Vera stood, walked to the witness stand, sworn in. Ms. Sutton, what did you observe in the weeks before April 12, 2022? I watched Pierce Kendrick survey the forest line adjacent to Howard's property 3 separate times, Vera said steadily. Wrote down his paths, timed his movements, passed the information to Lillian Kendrick, who positioned evidence collection points accordingly. We knew where he'd walk before he walked there. The jury's eyes widened. Lillian hadn't just reacted to the crime. She'd predicted it, prepared for it, built the trap with surgical precision. Sheffield moved to the final evidence layer. The wills. She displayed the forged version on the courtroom screen. Clean, professional. Denise listed as primary beneficiary. Then she activated the UV lamp. The original will appear in glowing purple ink. Completely different beneficiaries. Charitable trust. Vera's name. Punishment clause visible in Lillian's handwriting. Conviction of fraud triggers automatic forfeiture. Gasps from the jury. Lillian's authentic signature beside Denise's forgery side by side, undeniable. Mrs. Kendrick knew her daughter would forge this will, Sheffield said quietly. So she wrote 2. One visible, one true. One that would activate the moment her daughter was convicted. Reader justice isn't always swift. But when it's built from sawdust and invisible ink and a dead woman's love, it's patient and certain as tide. Denise broke. You can't sawdust doesn't. How did she know? Her voice cracked. Wood doesn't record. Footprints fade. She couldn't have. Her attorney silenced her. Too late. The jury had seen the facade collapse. Sheffield delivered her closing statement. 6 evidence layers, any one sufficient for conviction. Together, overwhelming. Lillian had built redundancy into everything lighthouse mechanics methodology applied to justice. The jury deliberated 90 minutes. I sat in the gallery. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Felt Vera's hand in mine, Griffin's presence beside me, Russell's steady breathing behind us. The army Lillian had recruited. The conspiracy she'd orchestrated from her deathbed. The jury returned. On the charge of attempted murder, how do you find... The foreman stood. Middle-aged man, steady voice. Guilty. On the charge of forgery. Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty. All counts. Both defendants. Federal conviction. The exit twist landed as Judge Halloran read the sentence addendum. Punishment clause activated automatically. Denise's conviction triggered total forfeiture. Estate restored to me. Everything she'd tried to steal returned by law itself. Lillian had trusted legal mechanism over courts built justice into the document's DNA. Denise looked at me across the courtroom. 45 years old. My daughter. Convicted murderer. I looked back. The sawdust had already said everything. Justice and mercy are different things. That morning I learned which one Lillian wanted. 2 weeks after the verdict, Judge Halloran called us back for sentencing. I sat in the same gallery seat, Griffin on my left, Vera on my right. The courtroom smelled like floor wax and recycled air. Denise wore orange now instead of navy blue. Prison jumpsuit. No makeup. Hair pulled back. She looked smaller than I remembered. Judge Halloran entered. The room stood. He sat. We sat. Ritual of justice proceeding according to law. Denise Marie Kendrick, he began. The court has reviewed the presentencing report, victim impact statements, and applicable federal guidelines. You have been convicted of attempted murder through poisoning, forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and in connection with evidence presented by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, 2 counts of murder in the deaths of Margaret Ann Whitmore and Douglas Raymond Fletcher, clients whose estates you manipulated before their deaths in 2017 and 2019. My daughter. 2 other victims I'd never known about. Griffin had found the pattern. FBI had proven it. Denise had killed before Lillian. Perfected her method. Made it routine. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole on counts 1 through 4. Halloran continued. Concurrent life sentences on counts 5 and 6. Federal custody. No eligibility for early release. The words landed like stones in still water. Life. My daughter. The phrases didn't connect in my mind. I'd raised her, changed her diapers, taught her to read, watched her graduate law school. Somewhere between that proud moment and this courtroom, she'd become someone who poisoned mothers and planned inheritances around murder. Denise showed no reaction. Face cement gray like the Porsche they'd confiscated. The car sat in federal impound, now waiting for auction. Asset forfeiture. Victim compensation. Everything she'd bought with blood money taken. Judge Halloran turned to Pierce. Pierce Howard Kendrick. 20 years federal imprisonment on drug trafficking charges. 10 years on conspiracy to commit murder to run concurrent. You'll serve 20 years total with possibility of parole after 17. Pierce nodded. Didn't look up. Didn't look at his mother. Prosecutor Sheffield stood. Your Honor, for the record, Mr. Pierce Kendrick provided substantial cooperation during investigation. He testified that Ms. Denise Kendrick planned to eliminate him after successful property transfer and asset seizure. His testimony was corroborated by communications evidence recovered from encrypted messaging applications. The entry twist landed quiet, but absolute. Denise had planned to kill Pierce too, after he'd helped murder Lillian. After he'd sabotaged my staircase and hidden cocaine and driven me toward the grave she'd prepared. She'd intended to erase him like she'd erased the others, clean inheritance, no loose ends, no witnesses who knew too much. She'd taught him to betray. He'd learned well. saved himself by testifying against the woman who'd birthed him. The defendant's Porsche Taycan has been seized under federal asset forfeiture statute, Sheffield added. Proceeds will contribute to Victim Restitution Fund. Pierce's last symbol of pride. Gone. 20 years in federal prison to think about what he'd learned from his mother and what it had cost him. The marshals prepared to escort them out. I stood, walked to the defense table before they could leave, carried the small walnut box I'd finished the night before, set it on the table in front of Denise. She looked at it, then at me. "Open it," I said. She did. Inside Lillian's love letters, the diary entries I'd found in the life preserver compartment, the ones Pierce's cocaine bag had sat on top of for 8 months without him knowing. "This is what you put drugs on top of," I said quietly. "What your mother left for you, what you destroyed without knowing." The walnut box sat between us like 40 years of unspoken things, too heavy to lift, too painful to leave behind. Denise touched the letters with shackled hands. "Careful, like they might burn." "I didn't know those were there," she said. First words she'd spoken to me since the arrest. "I know." She pulled out the diary. Leather-bound. Lillian's handwriting on every page. Opened to the title page. Read the inscription written in blue ink, dated 1998. "For Denise when she's ready to understand. With all my love always, Mom." The exit twist was there in Lillian's handwriting. She'd known. 24 years ago when Denise was 21, and already showing signs of the darkness that would consume her, Lillian had known. Had written a diary for the daughter she understood better than I ever had. Had loved her anyway. Not blindly. Not foolishly. But with the kind of unconditional love that sees the worst and chooses love regardless. The kind that builds evidence traps to stop murder while still leaving letters and diaries behind. The kind that wants justice and mercy, both even when they contradict. "She loved you anyway," I said. "I thought you should know before you go." Denise's face cracked. Just for a moment. 45 years of lawyer's composure breaking under the weight of a mother's handwriting. She never said, her voice failed. "She said it every day. You stopped listening. How do you mourn someone who tried to kill you?" Lillian knew. "I'm still learning." "You mourn them because they were yours once. Because love doesn't stop being love just because it's betrayed. Because grief and anger can exist in the same heart, pulling in opposite directions, both true." The marshals moved forward. Time to go. Federal prison waiting. Life without parole. 24,000 days to read that diary and understand what she'd destroyed. Denise closed the box, held it against her chest. "Can I keep this?" I looked at the prosecutor. Sheffield nodded. "Personal effects, non-threatening, allowed." "Yes," I said. "Thank you." She met my eyes. "I'm sorry isn't—" "No," I agreed. "It isn't." The marshals led her away. Orange jumpsuit. Shackled hands. Walnut box pressed to her heart like it could absolve 45 years of calculated cruelty. Pierce followed. Separate custody. Different facilities. Mother and son divided by the conspiracy that should have united them. I didn't watch them go. Turned to the courtroom window instead. Portland Harbor spread below boats moving through morning light, gulls circling water, catching sun. 40 miles north, Camden waited. The bluff, the workshop, the life I'd almost lost. Griffin's hand found my shoulder. Vera stood beside me. We looked at the water together. Not the ending I would have imagined. Not the ending I would have chosen if choice had been mine. But the ending Lillian prepared justice, served mercy, offered family fractured but not destroyed. She'd known the difference between the two, known which one mattered more. I was still learning. The workshop smelled like walnut again. Not death, not poison, just wood. A week after sentencing, I drove back to Camden. Vera waited at the farmhouse with Philip Garrison. New will to draft. New future to write. The old one, Lillian's invisible ink masterpiece, had served its purpose. Denise's conviction triggered the punishment clause. Everything restored. Time to build something that wouldn't require conspiracy to protect. We sat at my workbench. Philip spread papers across wood still stained with 40 years of sawdust. Simple structure this time, he said. No invisible ink necessary. Farm and workshop to Griffin and Iris, I said. Joint ownership. Trust fund for Jasper from sustainable timber harvesting Walnut, only selective cutting forest preservation standards. And the Lighthouse Light Fund. Philip looked up. Lighthouse Light. Charity fund. Legal support for fraud victims. Craft scholarships for children from poor families. Lillian sketched the idea years ago. I'd found the notes in her diary 2 days earlier. Dated 2018. 4 years before she died. She'd always planned institutional protection, not just for me, but for everyone who'd face what I'd faced. Legal fraud, family betrayal, the kind of crime that destroys from inside. Your wife would approve, Philip said quietly. She already did. I'm just finishing her sentence. Vera watched from this corner, said nothing. Hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for permission to exist in this space. Where does it say what happens to me? She asked finally. I looked at her. Mother's pale gray eyes, 70 years old. 2 years reconciled after 40 years estranged. That part's not in the will, Vera. I'm telling you now. You're home, downstairs bedroom, as long as you want it. She moved in 3 days later. Old beige Chevrolet pulled into the driveway first time she'd parked somewhere and called it home in 40 years. Carried 2 suitcases and a box of restoration paintbrushes. I showed her the downstairs bedroom. Window overlooking the walnut forest. Afternoon light coming through like filtered gold. She set her paintbrushes on the table by the window. Stood there looking out. First window worth looking out, she said quietly. 40 years. First complete family dinner happened that Friday. I sat at the head of the table. Vera beside me. Griffin and Iris opposite. Jasper between them, 5 years old, gap-toothed, asking questions about everything. Russell at the far end, first time he'd come inside my house in years. Cinder at his feet under the table. Vera had cooked. Pot roast. Carrots. Bread she'd baked that afternoon. The kitchen smelled like the childhood I'd almost forgotten, before father died, before property got divided, before 40 years of silence carved families into strangers. Jasper reached for bread, stopped, looked at Vera. Thank you, Grandma Vera. She froze. Hand halfway to the serving spoon. 5-year-old giving her a title she'd never expected to carry. Grandmother. Family. Belonging. I had to look away. Some things too large to look at directly, like staring at lighthouse lamp too long. Light burns into your vision, stays there hours after you close your eyes. Reader. I don't know if you've ever gotten back something you lost 40 years ago. It doesn't fit the same. Fits better. Like a tool you've finally learned to use correctly after decades of struggling. The weight familiar, but the purpose clearer. Vera at my table wasn't the sister I'd lost in 1984. She was better earned through suffering and silence, and the kind of grace that only comes from knowing what absence costs. 2 years passed like that. Ordinary, unremarkable, precious. Vera gardened, restored furniture in the workshop when I wasn't using it, taught Jasper basic woodworking, how to hold a chisel, how to read grain, how to respect tools that could hurt you if you didn't pay attention. Russell visited weekly for coffee, sat at the kitchen table, talked about weather and forge work, and occasionally Lillian careful sentences testing if grief had softened enough to touch. Griffin finished law school. Iris became fixture at Sunday dinners. I carved boxes and sold them at Camden Farmers Market. Made enough to cover property taxes and buy groceries. Didn't need more. Life ordinary. Unremarkable. More than most people get starting over at 77. More than I deserved. October 2024. Vera died peacefully in the downstairs bedroom. Age 72. Natural causes. No pain. Heart simply stopped while she slept. Window open. Autumn light on her paintbrushes. I found her at dawn when she didn't come up for coffee. Griffin and Jasper came immediately. We sat with her body until the coroner arrived. Seemed wrong to leave her alone after she'd spent so much of her life that way. Philip Garrison showed up that afternoon with a sealed envelope. "She asked me to give you this after," he said. "Said you'd understand the timing." I waited until everyone left. Sat in the workshop with walnut smell surrounding me. Opened Vera's letter. "Howard came to Camden to save you. Stayed because you saved me first. 40 years living in empty rooms restoring other people's furniture, trying to make old things beautiful again. 2 years at a full table worth all of it. Sufficient. Spent life painting on wood trying to restore old things to what they were. Didn't know the last thing I'd restore was us. Didn't manufacture the kindness you showed me. Only gave it place to land. God's funny that way, uses hardware store and $10 missing to answer prayers no one knew they were praying. Take care of walnut trees. They know how to keep what matters. Grain holds everything, joy. Grief 40 years, silence 2 years, laughter. Can't see at surface level. Have to split them open. You taught me that. Thank you for 2 years home. More than I earned, exactly what I needed. V. Grief is a walnut tree. Grows slow, lives long, keeps what matters in grain you can't see until you split it open. Lillian's grief, Vera's grief, mine. All there in the wood I'd worked with for 40 years without understanding what it was teaching me. I folded the letter, walked to the walnut forest behind the workshop. Trees very old, very tall. Lillian had loved them. Vera had looked at them every morning from her window. Now they were mine to protect, mine to harvest carefully, mine to leave for Jasper and whatever children came after. Light came through the branches like lighthouse glass. Slow, certain, without apologizing for the shadows it created or the time it took to travel. Just light doing what light does, showing you what's there if you're patient enough to look. I stood there until the sun dropped below the tree line. Went back to the farmhouse. Made tea. Sat at the table where Vera had sat every morning for 2 years. Not the family I'd started with, but the family Lillian and Vera had built from sawdust and invisible ink and $10 missing at a hardware store. Enough! Jasper asks the question every carpenter's grandchild asks. Grandpa, why walnut? No. October 2024. I'm 79 now. Planing wood in the workshop barn. Same bench. Same tools. Different hands, older, steadier in some ways. Jasper sits on the stool I made when Griffin was 5. Circle completing itself. The wood curls away from the plane in thin ribbons. Walnut. Always walnut. Box. I'm finishing started it 2 years ago. Vera had requested it before she died. Told me Jasper would need it when he understood what keeping means. Because it remembers, I tell him. And because it keeps what matters. What does it keep? I run my hand along the grain. Feel the weight of everything this wood has witnessed. Lillian's sculptures. Denise's sabotage. Pierce's DNA trapped in sawdust for 8 months. Evidence that saved my life carved into cellular structure. Light, I say. It keeps light. Jasper tilts his head. 7 years old now. Griffin's son. The one Denise and Pierce would have erased if Lillian's conspiracy had failed. He doesn't know that yet. Will someday. What I saw under UV light that morning wasn't scary, I tell him. It was light, purple powder on your Uncle Pierce's footprints. Red laser beam, Russell used to teach me Morse code. Invisible ink your Grandma Lillian used to write the will that saved everything. Gray eyes Aunt Vera showed me in the hardware store, pale as Fresnel lens glass, warning me to pay attention. Jasper watches the wood shavings curl. All of it was light, I continue. Every warning. Every quiet act of love Lillian and Vera and Griffin and Russell left scattered through darkness for me to find. UV powder, camera hidden in wooden eye, audio recording. Forged will glowing white under lamp, while real will glowed blue-green. All light. What does walnut smell like? Jasper asks. I close my eyes, breathe deep. Like keeping, I say. It smells like keeping. On the windowsill, the empty purple powder jar catches afternoon sun. Brilliant purple, same color as Vera's eyes. That morning, she gripped my arm in the parking lot. $10 bottle of marine fluorescent powder from Bradshaw's Hardware. That's what it cost to save everything. The land, the trees, Griffin's inheritance, Jasper's trust fund, my life. Vera's last 2 years at a full table. All of it balanced on $10 worth of chemical compound and a craftswoman's trembling hands. I think about that sometimes. How I almost didn't pay for her brushes that morning. Almost minded my own business the way you learn to in hardware stores and grocery lines. Almost walked past the old woman counting nickels with hands that shook from 40 years of estrangement. Whole story balanced on $10 and whether I'd notice. Reader, listener. Whoever you are tonight, you're holding this story for a reason. Someone needs you to remember it. Not because it's extraordinary, because it isn't. Because hardware stores and missing money and old women with paint-stained hands happen every Tuesday in every town. Because you'll face that choice tomorrow or next week, and you won't know it's a choice until it's already made. Be kind to the stranger in line ahead of you. Pay for the brushes. Notice the trembling hands. You don't know whose grandfather might be saved by paintbrushes, whose sister might be watching from the tree line, whose grandchild might inherit walnut forest and workshop because you paid attention when attention mattered. If someone grips your arm with warning about sawdust or powder or light, listen hard. Coastal fog carries warnings if you know how to hear them. Purple footprints glow if you know to look. Sometimes God uses old woman with $10 missing and 40-year craftsman hands to answer prayers people didn't know they were praying. Sometimes salvation comes through hardware store on Tuesday morning in June. Sometimes family restoration costs exactly what you've got in your pocket if you're willing to give it. Kindness is UV light, invisible. When you give it only shows its work later when darkness comes and you need to see what's really there. Jasper calls from the porch. Grandpa, dinner. Russell knocks the gate with his walking stick. 73 now. Still brings cinder for weekly visits. Still drinks coffee at my kitchen table. Still talks about Lillian like she's present tense, which she is in the ways that matter. Griffin's voice carries from the house, asking if I need help. Same voice that installed cameras and kept secrets and stood beside me in federal courtroom. He's 32 now, runs the Lighthouse Light Charity Fund, manages walnut harvesting, studies law at night, Lillian's grandson, Vera's student, my son. I place my hand on the walnut grain one more time. Feel the cellular structure that holds everything, joy, grief, 40 years of sawdust, 2 years of Vera's laughter, Lillian's final conspiracy, purple powder that glowed like prophecy. The walnut holds light different than other wood, I tell Jasper. My grandfather knew that. He taught me when I was your age. My wife knew that. She spent 40 years carving it into shapes that caught sun just right. My sister knew that. She looked at these trees every morning from her bedroom window and understood what they were keeping. Jasper touches the wood, small hands, careful, and now God willing, so will you. I'm finishing this box for him. recording this story for him, leaving him the workshop and the forest and the knowledge that light takes many forms. Invisible ink, laser pointers, Fresnel lenses, pale gray eyes in parking lots, kindness in hardware stores. All light, all of it. This story isn't mine anymore. It's yours. Jasper's. Anyone who's ever stood in workshop and wondered if wood remembers. Anyone who's ever paid for strangers' brushes and changed trajectory they'll never see. Anyone who's been saved by conspiracy they didn't know was happening. The walnut remembers. The light shows what matters when you know how to look. I stand. Take Jasper's hand. Walk toward the house where family waits. Russell at the gate. Griffin on the porch. Vera's memory at the breakfast table. Lillian's love in every board and beam. Has anyone ever handed you something in the dark and told you to wait for the light? I read every single comment, every story, every moment you noticed purple footprints or paid for brushes or listened when fog carried warnings. God bless you and good night from Camden. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 45 years trusting without questioning. I missed signs pills that looked different, conversations that ended too quickly, a daughter who asked about my will more than my health. I almost didn't pay for those brushes, almost walked past Vera in that hardware store, almost minded my own business the way we're taught to. Don't make that mistake. The lesson isn't just about betrayal or justice. It's about light, the kind that shows up in UV powder and invisible ink and $10 worth of paintbrushes. It's about kindness to strangers who might be the answer to prayers you didn't know you were praying. It's about wives who build conspiracies from their deathbeds and sisters who wait 40 years to come home. I believe God put Vera in that hardware store that Tuesday morning. Not coincidence. Providence. The walnut taught me this: some things grow slow, but they grow certain. Light always finds a way. If this story moved you, I'd be honored if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me, what would you have done in my position? Would you have paid for those brushes? Would you have trusted the purple footprints? Subscribe if you'd like more stories like this. Your voice matters here, and I read every single comment you leave. Thank you for staying until the very end. A final note: some details in this story have been shaped for reflection. What I hope you carry with you is the heart of it, the message about kindness, vigilance, and the light that saves us when we're standing in darkness.